Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Also, welcome to In Deep Sleep. If you are watching on the other channel, it'll be a little bit later. I am doing In Deep Sleep. I'm leaning into it and it is good. I'm just trying to make sure it's all good. So we're just playing catch up there on videos. Anyway, welcome. Today is an open Q&A, mostly about A Song of Ice and Fire. I've got a couple of Lord of the Rings questions as well, but as is always the case with this kind of open Q&A, we will be dotting around quite a bit. So there's no big opening preamble from me. We're just going to go straight diving into the questions. The questions are coming from my patrons. I will pick up as much as I possibly can in the chat as I am going through. But let's start with a question from Yeldinil, saying, Hi, Robert. You discussed last week that Melisandre sees Bloodraven and Bran as representatives of the Great Other, and we see the Weirwood network as linked to the others, blood sacrifice and general death imagery. How does that rhyme with Bloodraven's perceived efforts to create the prince that was promised, or Azor Ahai, and his presumed purpose of ending the others? Thank you. Say hi to Dan, and thank you to the moderators. Well, hi, Dan. Dan has gone upstairs already. But moderators, fantastic to have you. Send a bit of love to the moderators. They're fantastic. I will give them a bit more love a bit later. But yes, Melisandre sees in her flames a couple of characters who we can guess, are Bloodraven and Bran. And she comes to the conclusion that they are, well, first she wonders whether they are the Great Other, or Bloodraven is the Great Other, then comes to the conclusion that actually they're probably just the champions. This is I just quickly copied through the exact quote. A face took shape within the hearth. She's staring into the flames here. A face took shape within the hearth. Stannis, she thought, just for a moment. But no, these were not his features. A wooden face, corpse white. Was this the enemy? 1,000 red eyes floated in the rising flames. He sees me. Beside him, a boy with a wolf's face threw back his head and howled. So we get the imagery here: 1,000 red eyes, the wooden face, corpse white. This is Bloodraven, and the boy beside him with a wolf's face, Bran. We understand that's who she's seeing. She is wondering whether this is the Great Other, which is like the opposite and of her great god R'hllor. Now, just to sort of briefly explain the theology, she's got a Manichaean religion, which is two gods, or one god, R'hllor, and the other, almost equal and opposite, the Great Other. And so the Great Other is in charge of the others and darkness and cold and all the things that are opposite R'hllor, light and fire and things like that. So she's wondering, might this be who I saw? Was it the enemy? She decides no. Then she decides it must be a champion of the enemy. So should we take this seriously? Well, I think the short answer is that we should take what she sees in the flames seriously. She does see things. She sees true things in the flames. I don't think there's much doubting that. She did see Bloodraven and Bran, and Bloodraven did see her. But that doesn't mean that her interpretation of what she sees is actually right. In fact, a lot of the time, what she interprets is probably quite off the mark. Stannis being the obvious example. Now, so just because she sees them doesn't mean that they are what she thinks they are. Are they? Is Bloodraven actually serving the Great Other in some way? I mean, to my mind, all the evidence suggests not. This isn't to say that he's like some squeaky clean good character, but he does seem very much against the others. If you look at the very first time we come into contact with him, he's there gate crashing into Bran's dreams in his chapter in Bran 3, possibly in book 1. You get basically an entire chapter of Bran's dreams, and Bloodraven gate crashes them, and the one where he's falling and things like that. But also he takes him and he shows him stuff, and he shows him the land of always winter, and it is scary. This is the whole point about what he's saying. You have to learn this magic because we can oppose this. So right from the very start, Bloodraven is there showing who he is opposing. And then when Bran and co move up to Bloodraven's cave, you find outside are whites, the dead. Those who have been raised by the others. They're there trying to attack anyone who's getting into Bloodraven's cave. There's this kind of like magical force field around it, which is stopping any of the dead getting in. And clearly, they are against him, and he seems to be very much against them. So this is another instance of Melisandre just not understanding what she sees. She saw some figures that she didn't understand, and her first thought, well, is that the enemy? In the same way that she sees Stannis, and it's like, Stannis, he's the guy. We shouldn't necessarily take her interpretations as very true. Okay, let's go to the chat. Commander Ray saying, who's now been a member of this channel for 21 months. I see it pops up. If you're a channel member, if you want to support this channel, sorry, digression. If you want to support this channel, the best way to do that is through Patreon. There is a link down in the description. But if for whatever reason you don't want to do Patreon, I completely understand. Somewhere around here, there will be a button you can press to become a channel member. As a channel member, then your comments will get highlighted a bit more. And this tells me Commander Ray has been a member for 21 months, so thank you very much. Saying, finally a Thursday, I can make a stream. Welcome, great to see you. What's a plot line you're nervous about, how George will continue or finish? Good day to you, Dan the Dog and the mods. What am I nervous about, how he's going to finish it? That's a good question. I mean, I think the cop-out answer is that I do trust him. Because everything in terms of writing his own story, everything he's shown so far is that he's in complete control of this story. And he's, whatever other interpretation you may have of the long time he's taken to write this next book, I think we can say that he is taking it seriously. He's not doing any shortcuts here. He could have just like thrown it out in a couple of years, but he hasn't. He's taken this seriously. So the cop-out answer is that I'm not nervous about any of these. I think he's got this. In terms of the one I'm not 100% sure on, because it could go big, is probably Euron. Euron is completely different in the books to on the show. Euron, he's aspiring to be not a god, the god. Everything he's doing is bigger on so many levels of scale. So whatever we might think about, or the dragons, that's a big and impressive storyline, or the others, that's a big and impressive storyline. Here we get Euron, who could well have krakens rising from the sea, dragons, he could be raising the undead. He wants to destroy the world so that he can rule over its ashes. That's what he's about. So the most recent Euron-ish chapter that we've seen, the Forsaken chapter, the Aaron Damphair Greyjoy chapter that we had, the pre-release chapter from the Winds of Winter, that was, I think, one of the best chapters that George has written. So I'm not nervous about his ability to do it. I'm just excited, I guess, about the scope of what we may see. Rue Lusa saying, hey Robert, I was wondering why the Summerhall fire didn't make dragons, yet Dany's pyre did. Was magic weaker in the world when Aegon tried to birth? Hello, and hopefully I'm now back. I did, McKenna Poole, I just see in the chat you saying he disappeared right after I subscribed. Does this mean he hates me? No, it doesn't at all. It just means that if you were ever in any doubt as to my complete technical ineptitude, please do not be in any doubt anymore. I plugged the wrong thing into my laptop, thinking that that was the battery, but I was just not charging my laptop at all, and then it just died on me. So I've now put the right thing into my laptop, and hopefully we're now back and all good. Our Gem Magician's there in the chat. Hi there, Matt. Great to see you. Just as I am coming back online. Right, I was being asked a question when I disappeared from Rue Loser saying, "Hey Robert, I don't know at which point I disappeared, but let's go from this point. Hey Robert, I was wondering why the Summerhall fire didn't make dragons, yet Dany's pyre did. Was magic weaker in the world when Aegon tried to birth dragons? Thank you." Um, well, this is a great question. It's the kind of question I don't think any of us have got a complete answer to. And the reason we don't have a complete answer to is that we don't know exactly what Aegon did at Summerhall. We know that he did his research. We know that he got in some pyromancers. So there definitely was fire. That much we know. Um, there were sacrifices of a sort, unintentional, in as much as he died and Dunk died and his son also died. So there were sacrifices of a sort. There was certainly intentionality there. These are the kinds of things we definitely need for magic to work, but clearly it didn't work. Now, um, I think the way that George R. R. Martin would want us to look at this is actually not so much from the perspective of why did that not work, because the Targaryens have been trying to hatch dragon eggs by this point for well over 100 years. They tried almost every possible thing. So that is not the surprise. The fact that there were no dragon eggs hatched there is not a shock. The shock should be Dany's dragon eggs hatching. And that's the one that when he talks about it, he says that this was a miracle. This was a one-off. Um, Everything, basically, the stars aligned, and we had the red comet, we had the intentionality, we had the fire, we had the blood, we had the sacrifices. Everything just worked perfectly. And George R. R. Martin does not like to get into the detail of how magic works in his universe. What he likes to do is keep the mystery there. He doesn't like the idea that you could have sort of a clear list of these are the things you have to do in order to hatch dragon eggs. You have to do A, B, C, D, E. If you do those things, then the end result will be your dragon eggs will hatch. He doesn't like that. He wants this to be slightly mysterious. So this may not be the answer you want, but until we get more information, and we should, either in Fire and Blood Part 2 or whenever the Dunk and Egg stories get there. But until we get a bit more information, we have to go with this idea that this isn't the mystery. The mystery is why Dany's eggs did hatch. It may not be the answer you want, but it's the answer I suspect that George R. Martin will want us to have. Carl Karsnark saying it was never a perfect science. Absolutely. Even some full-on targs never had eggs hatch. Mayhaps the eggs can tell who is worthy at such an early stage. Possibly. There are so Mark Shees is asking, why did dragon eggs hatching work normally in the past? Yeah, so this is the earlier part of the equation, which is, as far as we can tell from Fire and Blood and other things, there wasn't some kind of magic formula to this. Dragon eggs just hatched normally. It was just, this was what happened. You had it in the same way that chicken eggs would hatch normally. A dragon egg would hatch normally. You would put it in a cradle, perhaps, and maybe it would hatch. So there wasn't some great mystique about this back in the past. Then there was what I tend to think of as the ambient level of magic in the world did come down. When dragons had gone, that all came down. It was harder to do magic across the piece. The pyromancers were complaining about it. It was harder for them to do their magic. There was in Karth, the magic users found it harder to do things. The glass candles weren't working, so the ambient level of magic did come down, which perhaps, as dragons are magical beasts, perhaps also explains why the natural method of hatching eggs did not work. The other part, obviously, is maybe the maesters poisoned them all. But that's the sort of the overall idea. Joe Magician saying, I've been on Twitch a few times playing games. Do go and check out. I disappeared just at the time that Joe Magician appeared. Joe Magician, friend of the channel, friend of mine, good guy, Matt. Great, been in this community for a very long time. Great theoretician when it comes to Song of Ice and Fire. And please do go and support him on his channel. And also, it would appear on Twitch. So do go and check that out. Last time I saw him playing games, it was Crusader Kings 3, I think. There's a mod for the Song of Ice and Fire. So let's go to a question from Martin S. saying, evening, Robert. I missed last week's stream, but back now. I hope you are all well. I am. Thank you very much indeed. Carl Karsnark saying, Matt equals Joe equals magician. Yes, absolutely. Right, let's go to another question from one of my patrons. Let's go to A.D. Ross saying, greetings, Sir Robert, and to you too, sir. In Fire and Blood, I find the account of King Jaehaerys' reaction to Alyssa Farman's theft of the 3 dragon eggs particularly fascinating. Jaehaerys contemplates flying Vermithor out into the Sunset Sea in pursuit of Sunchaser and even flirts with attacking Braavos. He discusses with, if I recall correctly, Septon Bath, the possible ramifications of Volantis getting hold of the dragon eggs and hatching them, painting a foreboding picture of the slave masters with dragons at their command. How realistic a danger do you think this actually was? If, as many fans suspect, the 3 dragon eggs Alyssa stole are Dany's eggs, then they were never hatched and turned to stone, only stirring when a Targaryen used the right blood and fire magic at just the right time. If anyone else had tried to hatch them, they clearly failed. Would the Volantines have had much chance of hatching the eggs if they had gotten them? And more so, wouldn't there have been other sources of dragon eggs in Essos? We know there were dragon lords in Lys until just after the Doom, so surely there were some dragon eggs there, unless Dragonstone was the only place dragons bred after the fall of Valyria. Well, great question. I've read it all out because I think there's a lot in there. And in terms of Jaehaerys, yes. So the situation, for those who've not read Fire and Blood, so Alyssa Farman, great character, steals 3 dragon eggs. She wants to travel. She wants to see the world. She steals 3 dragon eggs and she goes to Braavos. And she basically sells the 3 dragon eggs to the Sea Lord of Braavos in exchange for the best ship possible, called Sunchaser. And her idea is she wants to sail this west. What's west of Westeros? People have tried going west. Most people turn back. A few people just disappear and we never hear from again. She wanted to keep on going. So she got the ship and she just headed west. A couple of enterprising other ships went with her, but they turned back, and we don't really hear from her again. There was a possible sighting of her ship all the way around in Ashai, which is a hint that the world is round, and she did manage to go all the way around the world and end up in Ashai, which is great. But as far as we're concerned, what about those dragon eggs? So the 3 dragon eggs she gives to Braavos, or she sells to the Sea Lord of Braavos. And yes, Jaehaerys is anxious because the Targaryens had, as far as they were concerned, they had by this point in time had maybe a couple of 100 years where they had a complete monopoly on dragons. The Targaryens were the only people with dragons out in the world, which came with obvious advantages. And so he was concerned, what do I do? And his thought was, will I just go over there and attack them and get them to give them back? Because there are dragon eggs. And basically, Septon Bath goes over, he negotiates, and he comes to some deal, which is that the crown debt to Braavos, that will be cancelled. In exchange, the dragon eggs, okay, they stay there, but the Targaryens are going to keep a wary eye on them. And Jaehaerys basically has the opinion, if they hatch, I'm going to attack. I'm not going to allow anyone else to be having dragons. It's just us. We're the only people that have dragons. While they're small, we can take them out. When they get larger, that might be an issue. So they come to this deal, but the eggs do not hatch. And yes, I'm of the opinion that those dragon eggs are very, very probably the ones that Dany had many, many years later. So why didn't they? Well, again, we come back to the things we were talking about just one moment ago. Hatching dragon eggs, it's not an exact science. Probably part of how to hatch them is to do with heat, fire, and blood and sacrifice. The Braavosi probably didn't know any of that. Braavos as a place, not exactly Dragonstone with its kind of sulfurous heat coming up. It's damp and cold. It's almost the opposite of what you would want. So, what might have happened had the Braavosi or possibly the Volantines or anyone else got hold of some dragon eggs? Well, from what Jaehaerys was thinking, it wouldn't last long. The moment they got a hint of it, he would have just gone in and obliterated them. He wanted the monopoly on dragons to be with the Targaryens. Some people call me Morris, saying hot pie makes you his best pie. What is it? Fun question. Fun answer. Did you know that the actor who played Hot Pie actually set up a bakery? And I think it's still going. I suspect some enterprising person in the chat will be able to provide a link to it. But his speciality is that direwolf. Do you remember he gave Aya on the TV show? He gave her like a wolf-shaped pastry. That's his speciality. So that would be what I would go for from him. And Roman Lakovet saying, do you think there is a single overarching theme or message in A Song of Ice and Fire, or is the scope of the story too big for it? I don't think there's a single overarching message. I think a lot of people want there to be, but I don't think it is. There is. I think maybe we revisit this once it's finished. But I think George R. Martin isn't from the school of I'm trying to give a message and then I want to work out how to frame this message in a story. He was writing epic fantasy, and as he was writing it, it expanded. And so what we have is a whole load of stuff, and I suspect I would be able to find it was if I were looking at some quotes from him on this, but he, like Tolkien, loves that there's an applicability to this. People can take lessons from it. People can learn from it. People can grow from what they discover in it. And that's from individual quotes and also big themes. But he has not written and emerging despite whatever he wants. There is no one overarching theme, I personally think. Let's go to John McAndrew saying, hi, Robert. This question is a bit meta. Love it. But it's interesting to me because you've done so much research and created so much content for A Song of Ice and Fire and The Lord of the Rings. Are there any topics you'd like a do-over on, or feel in retrospect that you may have gotten wrong? Most of your videos are very democratic in the sense that you often encourage debate when rolling the credits, but I wonder if you yourself have had any second thoughts on your take on certain themes. Well, yes, I have. And I should probably start by saying what I've said for years now is that I don't tend to view what I do as creating theories about A Song of Ice and Fire. What I do or try to do is create working hypotheses, and the difference may sound nuanced, but to me it's quite important in that what I try to present in my videos is my best understanding of what's going on based on what we've got. And if we get more information, I am very happy to change what I say in my videos and what I personally think. I've not got a whole series of theories here that I go, if that's right, then boom, I'm right and everyone else is wrong, or whatever. That's not what I'm about. I'm about just trying to explain what I think is going on here. So with that in mind, we have had, over the course of the time that I've been doing these videos, several extra bits of information. We've obviously had House of the Dragon come through. We've had Fire and Blood has appeared. We've had various things that George R. Martin himself has clarified. So extra bits of information have been coming, and we will get more. Ideally, the books, but we'll get the stage play at some point. We're going to get the Dunk and Egg TV show. George R. Martin will continue, I'm sure, saying things on his blog and elsewhere. And hey, who knows, we might get Fire and Blood Part 2 or whatever. We will get more information coming through. And when those bits of information come through, then I will very, very happily adjust what I present to people. So, with all of that said, have there been things that I have changed my mind on. And I am reminded of this because Joe Magician was in the chat. I don't know whether he still is. Have a quick flick through. If you're still there, Matt, say hi. Because I'm going to give you a bit of credit right now. There was, for a while, I was reasonably clearly of the opinion that Aegon the Conqueror had not had a vision of the others before he invaded. And he'd not come to any kind of agreement with Torrhen Stark about the others or anything. And the reason I came to that conclusion was that, first of all, we weren't told it. It wasn't there written that this was the case. But then also, just looking at what Aegon himself did when he came to Westeros, he didn't really go to the north. I forget the exact numbers, but it took him like 3 decades before he made a proper trip up north. So in my mind, if this was the reason why he invaded Westeros, surely he would have gone to the north. I have had to adapt that because of House of the Dragon. Clearly is based on Aegon's, not based on, but one of the founding points there is that Aegon did have this vision and passes it down as the Song of Ice and Fire. And George R. R. Martin has basically confirmed that. So that is now semi-canon until we get it written down somewhere. And as a result, I've reassessed my view. And I now think that, yeah, he did get a vision. And then I have to go, well, if that's the case, why didn't he go north? And then I had to go, I have to only assume that he trusted the Starks. So once you start going through that process, then you reach slightly different conclusions. So that's an example of a thing that I definitely have changed my mind on. And the reason why I just named Joe Magician a moment ago was that he was I can remember him being on this channel years ago. And he had a very strong view that when Aegon met Torrhen Stark, they talked about their respective understandings of the others and things like that. And that was why the Starks bent the knee, and that was why Torrhen Stark didn't go north, because they trusted each other. So I'm hat tip there to Joe Magician, but that's an example of a thing that I have changed my mind on. Another one, though, I would say very recently that I've kind of shifted my view on. I think I've mentioned this before. Is why Jaqen's in Old Town. Jaqen H'ghar. We see him appear. He's hiding as Pate, and this is more of a nuance than anything else. But following collaboration I did with History of Westeros, if you watch the main channel, you'll know that I do quite a few collaborations with them, and one of those was what's under the House of Black and White, and we were speculating in that maybe there's a tunnel that goes over to the Iron Bank, because they need to store their money somewhere. And that was just well, maybe that's the case. But that was sort of in my head when I reread the section in the Song of Ice and Fire when Tycho talks to Jon at the wall. And he's there trying to find Stannis. He wants to, they've given up on Cersei, and he wants to find Stannis and lend him some money so Stannis can go and take the Iron Throne. But while he's there, he spends a happy few days with Jon, and Jon's thinking, well, actually, you know what? We could do a bit of cash here at the Night's Watch. I wonder whether he'll give me a loan. And so they chat through it. He thinks we need a few more boats. We need to be able to buy some more provisions. It's going to get very cold for a very long time. We need to make sure we all stocked up. And so they do this, have a long discussion over a few glasses of wine. It seems very nice. And then after that, they seem in quite a jovial mood, and then they're joking about how cold it is. And John says, "Oh, yeah, I hear these rumors. There's dragons somewhere. We could do with a dragon here. It would certainly warm things up." And then Tychonosaurus suddenly goes really weirdly serious. He says, "We don't joke about dragons." And John's like, "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize." He says, "No." So the Valyrians had dragons. Dragons are bad. And John's like, "Okay, sorry, I'll move on." And it's just this kind of weird moment. And it made me think, if that's the attitude not just of that one character, but of the Iron Bank, and the Iron Bank have heard that dragons are back, won't they be thinking to themselves, because we know that they do intervene in geopolitics, how do we get rid of these dragons? And that, for me, tied into why on earth might Jaqen be there. He's clearly, we don't know huge amounts about why he's there, but he's clearly trying to get access to the bits of knowledge that there are in the deepest sections of the Citadel. So if anyone knows how to kill a dragon, they do. So that's something that I've slightly nuanced my take on. I wasn't 100% sure why he might be there, but now I wouldn't say I'm certain, but I'm very strongly leaning towards the idea that he is there to learn how to kill a dragon. John Merkel, a post-Melstream Mel question. Didn't think it was asked. Sorry if it was. Any thoughts on George R. Martin commissioning an icy white and blue Melisandre figurine? Yeah, I think I've got a question about this a little bit later from one of my patrons, but I'm happy to answer this now. For those who do not know the background, this is a few years ago now. It's he has somewhere in his study a Melisandre figurine, but it's not Melisandre dressed up in a red dress, etc. He specifically asked for her to be ice white. And this has led to lots of speculation. Is this him saying that she's actually going to be working for the others? Is she going to become a white? What's going on there? He has not commented on this. So I think the best we can do at this stage is to give the generic overall answer, and say that we have to wait and hold on for any more information from him. The generic overall answer is that he's writing A Song of Ice and Fire. If he wants a figurine, who symbolizes fire probably more than anyone else? Maybe Dany, but definitely Melisandre. And why don't you just flip it? Says she's also ice. That kind of works as a meta narrative comment on your entire story. So that seems to be, like, at a high level, what seems to be what's going on. Whether this is him thinking ahead to what's going to happen to Melisandre, we simply don't know. The fact that this got out seems to imply this probably isn't a big spoiler, or otherwise he wouldn't be wanting it to go. He's very strong on not giving out spoilers about what's going to happen in his story. So I think it's unlikely that this is a spoiler that she's suddenly going to turn into an ice white or something like that. NOS42 saying, "Hi, Robert. If the show ending is right, how could House Stark gain independence for the North, but keep the other kingdoms under the Iron Throne ruled by a Stark? Why would any great house accept this?" Okay, so usual caveats. The, the way things finished in the show, not necessarily, very probably not the way they end in the books. That said, Bran being king does seem to be one of those things that is going to happen in the books as well as on the show. And there being a great council is also seemingly quite likely. Now, when I say there being a great council, if you remember them in the Dragon Pit, there were I don't know, probably a dozen or so nobles there who were discussing who's going to be king. That, I think, was a show cut down version of what a great council looks like. The Great Council, we've had great councils in the history of Westeros. The nobles all gather and decide who's going to be king. So if the show was sort of hinting at they all get together and decide in a great council and decide who's going to be king, and it's going to be Bran, that kind of works for me. One other thing that kind of works for me is this idea that if you looked at that Great Council on the TV show, it was stacked in the Starks' favour. Bran was there, Sansa was there, Arya was there. Who else was there? I think Sam was there, who clearly is John fanboy Brienne, she was on Team Stark. You had Edmure Tully, who Sansa put in his place. Basically, you had Davos, who was hand to Jon. It was stacked in favour of the Starks. The others really didn't get much of a voice. So the Starks decided who should be king. And if you take what we think is the kind of like the middling position of where the Seven Kingdoms is likely to be, that kind of fits. Is that the Starks may well survive, and lots of other places, probably the ruling houses won't be much around. How much of House Lannister do we think is going to survive? Maybe Tyrion. How much of the Arryns is still going to be there? It's not 100% clear. You can start going down through the list and going to work out who actually is going to be left over. So the idea that the Starks will have some sort of a majority, that kind of makes sense. And so the idea that they might then put Bran in place, again, makes sense. Once you've got King Bran, and if you do have Sansa who wants independence, then who's going to stop King Bran saying, you get it, North can be independent? No one's going to stop him. So I think it kind of works. Why would any great house accept this? The Starks would accept it. The King would accept it. The Tullys would accept it. The Arryns are no more. The Lannisters will largely be down to Tyrion, who knows where Tyrion's going to be, but he's probably going to be not on the winning side, in as much as he will be Team Dany. I don't think the Iron Islanders will have a huge amount of a voice. The Baratheons, they're pretty much gone. So the main houses are not really going to be there anymore. Let's have a quick. I think I've got another question in the chat. Yeah, Callie Summers saying, if the Watch had trouble repaying a loan to the Iron Bank, what would they do? Destroying the wall would be pretty bad for business or the world. Yeah, so I mean, what would they do in terms of the Iron Bank? So the Iron Bank, we know about their main business model with kings and queens and ruling folk, is that if they default, then they just raise up another prince to take over from them. That doesn't really work for the wall. I absolutely agree. But the Iron Bank lend to other people as well. And it's probably worth saying that what the Night's Watch were borrowing was not even slightly of the same scale as as Stannis. Stannis got enough money to be hiring 20,000 sellswords for a long period of time, massive amount of money. Jon wanted a handful of boats and some food. That was basically what he was after. It wasn't a huge loan. So I think it's probably fair to say that this is the same. They would have done the same kind of due diligence as they would for any small loan to a noble family somewhere else. And would they write it off? Well, probably not. It may well be that they could get rid of the Lord Commander who decided that they couldn't pay, and then put in another one who agreed that they would pay somehow and come up with some kind of payment structure. I don't know, but I think the main point is that this isn't the same scale as they were lending to the Iron Throne. Have I got any more questions in the chat? Yes, I have. And Samuel Hyatt saying, what if the swords in the forging of Lightbringer weren't broken, but Valyrian steel swords? Water equals red rain lion? Water equals red rain, lion equals bright raw, Lightbringer equals dawn. Okay, so this is an interesting one. So these are the legend of the forging of Lightbringer is that Azor Ahai tried first time, and he spent a long time making this great sword, and they tried tempering it in water, and it broke. And then the second one he tried tempering it by stabbing a lion, and that broke. And then the third one he stabbed his lover in the heart, Nisa, and that became Lightbringer. So what if this legend is only partly true? George R. R. Martin does warn us that we shouldn't take them as literal truths, these legends in his world, because they're thousands of years old. They're not literally telling us exactly what happened, but there is some truth in there somewhere. Might the first one be red rain, and the second one be bright raw, and the third one be dawn? I think in terms of when these things were crafted, so dawn, the House Dane family sword, is thousands of years old, and it's not Valyrian steel. This is made from a meteorite. Bright Raw, as far as we can understand, is a few hundred years old. It was one of the last swords, we think, that was Valyrian steel swords that was made in Valyria before the Doom. Red Rain is a sword which is, I think that was House Rain, as in the Rains of Castamere. But might this just be talking about those? I think the implication is that those two Valyrian steel swords were created a lot later than the original legend. I think I got another question here. So Caius Ballerina picking up a question from Meadow Pears. So thank you very much. I love it when people do this. It's very kind. I'm really curious about his take, I assume that's my take, on the idea that the Andals brought about the long night. I mean, I've not seen a convincing argument for suggesting that they did. So the Andal invasion, as the general histories of Westeros go, took place. And when we say invasion, it's not just they all came over in big boats at the same time. This was over hundreds of years. A few boats here, another few boats there. It was a slow invasion. It was a slow integration. Invasion is the right word in as much as this was not welcome by the people who were there. And the Andals came with swords and axes, so they were ready to fight. So is there a hint that they might have caused the first long night? I mean, I personally don't see it. So I've not seen a well-argued case for this. Maybe there are bits of evidence I've not seen. But the histories that we know say that they came afterwards, a while afterwards. So I think my answer is no. I don't instinctively. I don't think that they did, and it's one of those I've not seen the evidence to suggest it. Connor saying, hello, thank you for all your very informative videos. Well, you're very welcome. What are the chances of Bright Raw or Guardian showing up again? Also, just signed up for the Patreon. Well, welcome to Patreon. And I will use this as an opportunity to say thank you, patrons. I hugely appreciate it. Your support is what allows me to do this. And I don't forget, I think it's fantastic and I hugely appreciate it. And that is why I frame these not just the Q&As, but pretty much all of my live streams around questions from my patrons as a thank you. So thank you very much for joining Patreon. What are the chances of Bright Raw or Guardian showing up again? Well, I did do a video on Bright Raw a little while, a couple of months ago or so, I think. So for those who don't know the history, the Bright Raw was the Valyrian steel sword that the Lannisters had. And after the doom of Valyria, the Lannister king, so in that 100 years or so before the Targaryens invaded, the Lannister king, who I think was King Tommen the Third, possibly, he went to Old Valyria. And he headed off there with some ships, quite a few ships, basically a navy, and he took with him the ancestral Valyrian steel sword, and he disappeared. And the question is, what happened to him? What happened to the sword? And we don't know. But the idea that he went to Valyria and he and all of his fleet disappeared, just the story checks out with everything else we've heard. There was a massive army with a dragon flying overhead that went in. They completely disappeared. Everyone we know of, with the possible exception of Euron, though he may be lying, who has been into Valyria, has not reappeared. So there's no suspicion there. The only possibility is that he stopped off at Volantis and said, and they thought, oh, that's a nice Valyrian steel sword, we'll steal that. But even that doesn't feel that likely. They came to a deal that he would go off. They would sort of help him. The help they gave, it's not very clear, but they were like pointing, oh, it's in that direction. And they gave him a chance to sort of chill out for a little bit. And they came to a deal that they would get half of any goods that he managed to salvage, which seems like a good deal for them, as they didn't do anything and they got a chance to get 50% of all the plunder. So there's no real advantage for them in it. Gerion, Uncle Gerion, this is Tyrion, Jaime Cersei's uncle, Tywin's brother, he headed off looking for it just a few years before the main story, actually, and he's not returned either. Now, is there a chance that we will see either of them again? I think Bright Raw, no. I think that's gone. Gerion, only if he chickened out at the last minute. And he turned around and said, you know what, actually, this is a pretty crazy idea. And he decided it's now safe because the implication is that one of the reasons why he did it was that he was always in his older brother Tywin's shadow. Tywin this, Tywin that. What am I going to do which is going to make me any better? And so he went off and he thought, well, the thing I can do which will make me go down in the history books is if I find Bright Raw and bring it back. So he headed off. Now, there's no indication that he found it. He certainly hasn't returned. He was last seen heading towards there as well. So probably not is the short answer. Beesman saying, hi, Robert. Nice to catch you live again after a while. Fantastic to see you. Any favourite theories that come to mind that you think were clearly set up in earlier books and then abandoned later by George R. R. Martin and won't pan out? I don't know about theories, but plans. Danny going to a shy, I think very strongly was suggested. Shy is mentioned a lot in the early books. This is where the knowledge is. This is, the all the fire and dragony stuff that comes from there. When you get Quaithe and she's doing all of her talking to Danny, then she's like basically saying go to a shy. That's certainly what Danny interprets it as, but that seems to just have gone by the wayside. Now, I think the thing that is probably most interesting if you start going down that route, though, is what can we glean from the early books, particularly book one, and particularly the first half of book one, that show where George R. R. Martin was going, that he has since then pushed back or slightly changed. And what I mean by that is that when he started this out, famously, he'd written, I think, 13 chapters. So maybe a quarter, probably about 20% of the book. And that was when he sort of wrote off. He got his agent to go and sort of try and find who wants to buy this. And he wrote the overview of where it was going. And in that overview, it's very clear that there's a lot there that has changed, but it's very clear. At the time, he thought it was 3 books. So the first few chapters of book one are written, him thinking this is going to be over and done with within 3 books. So there are some things which are mentioned a lot more in those first opening chapters that he then slows the pace on. And the most obvious example of this is the Isle of Faces. The Isle of Faces gets mentioned 4 or 5 times in the opening chapters of book one. Even Danny, when I think it's Jorah is talking to her about the delights of Westeros, he name checks it 4 or 5 places, one of which is the Isle of Faces. And to us now, it's, oh, that's a bit weird. He mentioned the Isle of Faces. He's a northerner. Why would he be? But it's because George R. R. Martin was wanting us to be aware that there was a place called the Isle of Faces. He then slowed down, and the mentions of the Isle of Faces in the middle or the next few books, very rare. Other than Arya sort of like working her way around the gods I like. So that I think is probably one of the more interesting kind of, it's not abandoned, it's more postponed ideas. And do I have another question? CK saying, why would any northern houses tolerate or respect the Boltons given their breach of guest right, even if the Boltons were backed by the crown? So it's a perfectly valid question, and I think the answer is almost certainly they wouldn't. The point is that the Boltons and the Freys wiped out a huge amount of the northern armies, which meant that the northern houses are, that wouldn't say they're defenseless, but they can't easily defend themselves against the Boltons and the Freys and the Lannisters if they decided to come north. But just as importantly, if not more importantly, they took prisoners. And this is a point not often mentioned, I think, and it's actually quite an important one. They took prisoners at the Red Wedding. So we know Edmure, obviously, was taken prisoner, but also Great John Umber and Amandali and all of the main houses they took prisoners from, which mean that the northern houses who were there, and as far as they're concerned, House Stark, forgetting the Great Northern Conspiracy for one moment, where some of them have got a different idea, but House Stark has been obliterated. Ned has gone, Cat has gone, Jon has gone, Bran and Rickon, everybody knows that Theon killed, Arya has gone missing, Sansa has gone missing, and she married a Lannister anyway. So as far as they're concerned, House Stark has gone. So they kind of have to accept the status quo for the moment, added to which, if they do even hint at turning against the Boltons, then the Boltons are going to kill their loved ones. So this is why they're all playing quite slow, quite cozy, and they don't want to make a move until they're absolutely sure that they can do something about it. And a question from, am I caught up in the chat? I think I might now be. I think that's me caught up in the chat. Let's go to question from a friend saying, happy Thursday, Robert, and to you too. If you had to pick your dream small council, any character in the Song of Ice and Fire world from any time period, who would you choose? You can decide on the reasoning, whether you go for the most competent, the most fun, etc. Let's say you need Hand of the King, Lord Commander of the King's Guard, etc. What would you go for? Right. So I think this is a good one to throw to the chat to start with, because I'm sure everyone will have views on this. Who would be in your fantasy draft for the small council? I mean, I'll do a sort of a starter. Hand of the King, I'm going to go for Septon Bath. He seems right about most things, and not just he gives good advice, but he seems to do the boring things competently. This is noticeable when you read Fire and Blood. It falls to Jaehaerys to kind of bind the Seven Kingdoms together. We often think of it, he's got like the long rule, he's good and wise, a ruler, and all the rest of it. Aegon did the conquering and starting to bring things together. And then you get Aenys, who was not a strong leader, and then you get Maegor, who was incredibly divisive. Jaehaerys's rule was the one where everyone was kind of brought together, and that's partly through marriages, but also through standardization of laws across the Seven Kingdoms, establishment of things like the King's Road, getting mercantile routes sorted across the Seven Kingdoms. That is the kind of boring stuff that Septon Bath did, as well as providing good advice and seemingly very right about things like dragons. So I think I'd have him as my hand, who, and as that seems to have been quite a good time, I'd have Rhaego Draz as my Master of Coin. I wouldn't 100% trust him not to embezzle some funds from there, but whatever he didn't seem to affect the overall monetary health of the Seven Kingdoms. The Seven Kingdoms seem to emerge well from that time. So I would go with him. I like Sir Barristan as a Lord Commander of the King's Guard. He seems to have morals about these kinds of things and seems to be just a very good fighter. Prime Sir Barristan, I want that kind of guy. If I'm the king, I want him on my side. He's the guy who did the daring mission to go get Aerys II. One-man mission into a castle dungeon when he's outside the castle walls, climbing over the castle walls, getting into the castle, infiltrating all the way down to the dungeons, rescuing the king, throwing him over his shoulder, running all the way back out again, all on his own. This is legendary stuff. So I would want him on my team. Master, Mistress of Whisperers, maybe Massaria, Grandmeister or Maester, I don't really care, to be honest. Somebody that I feel I can trust. As for Master of Ships, maybe Alan Oakenfist or Cordis Villarion. I think I would happily have either of them, but I will throw this to the chat. I will try and read out a few in the chat if you want to drop some thoughts in there. There's a lot of good ideas. Feel free to throw a few funny ones in as well. CK, why would the noble houses accept the Targaryen line being destroyed? I get deposing Aerys, but killing Viserys and Daenerys, I find it hard to reconcile given the aftermath of the dance. So when you say the noble houses, why would the Lords Paramount during Robert's, if this is the question you're asking, why would the Lords Paramount during Robert's rule be okay with him trying to kill Viserys and Daenerys? Well, they weren't okay with him to start with. Jon Arryn basically blocked it for a long time. It's one of the ironies that Viserys, when he's talking to Dany, is basically saying, we're always on the run from the assassins from King Robert. But then you get the other side of it, and it's very clear Jon Arryn sort of said, no, just let them be. We're not going to do the assassin thing. And Varys kept track on them. It was only when Daenerys became pregnant that Robert Baratheon said, "No, that's it. Let's assassinate her." And then you will find there was that split in the small council. So some of the lords were okay with, well, some of the small council were okay with it, some of them weren't okay with it. So why would they be okay with it? Because the power has now passed. Targaryens were not what they once were. At the time of the Dance of the Dragons, then they were the Dragon Lords. They were the most powerful family, not just in Westeros, but all of the world. By the time we get to Robert Baratheon's reign, as far as everyone was aware, there were 2 Targaryens left, and they were fast running out of money. He was known as the beggar king. Um, he he was just going around trying desperately to get anyone to help him. He was more of a joke than he was an actual rival to the throne. And the idea of them getting dragons again, no, that wasn't going to happen. And a question from Orion's Orcas saying, "Hi, Robert. Hope you, Dan, and all your moderators are well." Actually, let's do the moderators now properly. Moderators, thank you. If you are watching this live and if you're in the chat, the reason why it's such a happy and uplifting place, there are no spam bots or anything bad going on there. It's because the moderators are amazing. So if you could just give them a little bit of love, I would hugely appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. So Orion's Orcas, do you think the eye colour of the direwolves are as important as their names? 3 of the Stark children's direwolves' eyes are yellow, and 2 of them are already dead, Lady and Greywind. Bran's direwolf has yellow eyes as well. Rickon's has green eyes, Arya's has golden eyes, and Jon's has red eyes. I've been thinking for a long time that direwolves with yellow eyes signify a literal or symbolic death of their owners. Have you ever thought about making a video about this topic? So I did a video a long time ago about the direwolf names and that link to their owners' fates, which is I think probably about as established a theory as we have in this world of A Song of Ice and Fire. If you've not come across it before, it's basically the name of the direwolf says something important about the fate of their owner. So Jon's direwolf is called Ghost. Jon is going to die, but he's going to carry on like a ghost. And you get, for example, Shaggy Dog, Rickon's direwolf, which everybody interprets a Shaggy Dog story as a kind of a long and rambling story that ultimately ends inconsequentially without really meaning much. And most people think that that's what's going to happen with Rickon, is that he's going to come back and just die in a feelingly meaningless way. So that's the direwolf name theory. The direwolf eye colors, I think if I'm being picky, and I like the thinking, and I think there is something in there, which I will get to in just one moment. If I'm being picky, I would say that those who have yellow color eyes, and also Nymeria, Arya's direwolf, they're not just said to have yellow eyes, they're sometimes golden eyes or eyes like sunset or something like that. So their eye color is sort of on a spectrum, all of them like that. So that seems to be, as far as we can tell, and we've got a couple of references from people, that seems to be like, that's the default. That's a direwolf eye color. So really, we've got 2 direwolves. We've got different eye colors. And Ghost is one of them. And Ghost is set up to be different, being white. The other direwolves are grey or brown or something more normal wolfy. Ghost is white hair and red eyes. Now, that is Bloodraven's colouring. He's got white skin, he's got red eyes or a red eye. So that, I think, is the first hint we've got going on there. And then we have to look at Rickon, and Rickon's dog, Shaggy Dog. Oh, direwolf, Shaggy Dog, which is Green Eyes. Now, Green Eyes, what does that signify? Well, we're told that that means somebody has green dreams if they have green eyes. So, or perhaps even a green seer. So I think this is showing that there is strong magic going on there. There is a school of thought that perhaps Rickon, I'm not going to go into all of the detail now, but perhaps Rickon is actually even a stronger green seer, or potentially a stronger green seer than Bran. But he's very young. He was, at the start of the story, he was 3. We don't think of him as being that young, but he really is, which means that now he's 5, 6. He's still a child, very much a child. And maybe there's a hint that he is potentially a strong green seer, but also perhaps I saw this thinking a while ago that the other direwolves have their owners have in some way put their personality onto their wolf. With Rickon, because he's so young, it's the other way around. You hear about him increasingly being described in wolfish ways. And if he has gone to Skagos, there's a very good chance that he's missing out on what we might consider civilization to start with, and teaching and training, and the wolf will perhaps become stronger than him. So that's the hint that we've got going on there. And then the second, Orion's Orcas, the second question was you had about how Tyrion is going to get Dany to trust him. Design dragon saddles, tell her about young Griff, share his reading knowledge about dragons. He's going to need much because HBO Tyrion and book Tyrion are 2 different people. So on that one, yes, they are very different people. But I think there's 2 elements to this. The first is that she's going to, when she comes back from the Dothraki Sea, her thought is to attack Westeros. That now will be the time. I've got a fleet, I've got dragons, let's go. And Tyrion will be there. And the 2 things that will come to the fore quite quickly, I think, are firstly, yes, he's a Lannister, but he killed his father. And he clearly hates his sister. So he's actually on her side. He wants her to invade. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, yeah, he knows about dragons. In fact, he probably knows more about dragons than almost anyone in the world. By which I mean that he was obsessed with dragons as a child. He read every book he could possibly find about dragons. When he gets onto the Shy Maid, they make him put down all the knowledge he has about dragons in a book. He wrote a book about dragons. So Dany has none of this information. Viserys didn't teach her much. And she's now got these dragons, and she's thinking. We see her thinking a few times. I don't know how this works. How do I control a dragon? How she wonders, how do I feed them? What do I need to do to help them grow? She's not sure. If Tyrion comes along and says, "I've read everything that is out there about dragons, and I can help you," that will gain a little bit of her trust. Okay, so question from Kieran McGee saying, a thought about George R. Martin's contribution to the lexicon. Phrases from A Song of Ice and Fire that just ring so naturally, but I only know them because of George R. Martin. Bread and salt, mummers or farce, call the banners, and many more. Do you have a favourite? Oh, this is fun. I mean, I would agree with you that he tends not to create new words for stuff, but he does as with the examples you've got there, he does take an existing word and make it, or phrase, and make it more ubiquitous. So yeah, mummers is definitely in terms of sort of theatre groups, that's something that it's a real thing, but he popularizes it more. Call the banners. I use call the banners. I mean, I've done it even in a Lord of the Rings video when I was talking about Aragorn calling on his fiefs down in Gondor. Uh, and saying it's like calling the banners, because that's now, I think, for fantasy readers in particular, we understand what that means. So yes, I don't know if I've got a favourite, but all of those I think are excellent. Few thoughts. Oh, just noticing Samantha Drake picking up, I think, Callie Summers saying Visenya for the Mistress of Whisperers. That's a good idea. And Carl Karsnark saying wolves can have yellow or gold eyes in real life too. It looks extra spooky against a dark coat in the snow. There we go. Good knowledge. Always rely on Carl Karsnark for some good knowledge. And question from Ent Famous saying, what's going on at the God's Eye? It's smack in the middle of all the action in the Riverlands, but no one ever goes there but Howland Reed. Is it the Weirwood Modem or the Children of the Forest holdout, or both? Well, yes, so it is there, a lake in the middle of the continent, an island in the middle of the lake. And anytime anyone tries to get there, then the wind blows them away, or the currents mysteriously turn them away, or if they get very close, then a whole load of birds suddenly come attacking them. People do not go to the Isle of Faces, except for two people, one of which was Adam Velaryon, that perhaps we'll even see in this next season of House of the Dragon. That's exciting. And Howland Reed. So Howland Reed seems to be, if not invited, then certainly very welcome. Adam Velaryon seems to be the person who thought, I'll just land here with a dragon then. So because like the currents in the sea can't stop me if I land with the dragon. So not many people go there. What's going on? Well, we know that that was where the pact was signed, for example, between the First Men and the Children of the Forest. We know that there are lots of weirwood trees there. We know that the Green Men are there to protect it. Exactly what the Green Men are is another matter, of course. But all the hints are that, yes, this is in some way, you call it the Weirwood Modem, the heart of the Weirwood network is another way of putting it. That seems to be their central hub or base. And yes, I think there will be some Children of the Forest on there as well. Let's go to Corvus Corax. I have been cogitating, good word, about George R. Martin's introduction of Fagon and how in the TV show Jon's parentage didn't matter. Do you think he will eventually subvert the Hidden Prince trope and not have Jon's parentage or place in the line of succession mean anything at all? Could he be getting meta with the reader's reactions and expectations to prophecy and rightful rulers, just as his characters all saw different meanings in the Red Comet? Best to you and yours. Well, yeah, I think he's going meta, but I don't know whether it came out from. I did a couple of weeks worth of discussions about R plus L equals J, and I don't know whether it came out from that, but I think it's always worth emphasizing that whereas we have had decades now to pour through all of this, and it seems pretty obvious now, of course, and we've had the TV show, of course, we know who Jon is. When he was writing it, he probably wasn't expecting that to be the case. He probably was thinking, I'll write these 3 quick books, and in book 3, we'll get the reveal. Maybe some people have been paying attention and they will have figured it out as we go along. but for many readers, it will have been a surprise. We're now in the world of it not being a surprise for people. So I think George R. R. Martin is not going to change his story because of readers' expectations. So we're still in this world of we have to think of it as being a bit of a surprise when it happens. So that said, as a slight preamble, is he going to go meta and make it so that it doesn't matter at all? Because you're right, I think on the TV show, they did it as a big reveal. It didn't really make much difference in the end, did it? On the TV show, in the books, I think it will matter in as much as he may well be able to claim a dragon. And it won't be on the TV show. He had a dragon for, I don't know, 2 episodes. I don't know. I didn't actually count, but it didn't make huge amounts of difference, him having a dragon. I think it will make a huge difference if he does get a dragon in the books. And then I think we're left with this issue of there's a difference between whether, and what you're seeing there is, could it not matter in the end? I think it might not matter in as much as the readers will get that, oh, so that's what's going on, and we will know who he is and what that therefore means. But in the books, the other characters, will they care? John himself, will he care? I think that if you're looking for a trope subversion, that is where the big shift is. It's not whether other people might buy into this. Some of them might. It's whether John wants it. Does John want to be king? I think he probably isn't going to reject his ancestry when he discovers what it is. But if someone comes in and says, this means you could be the new king, I don't think he's going to turn around and say, yeah, I'd love that. That doesn't seem to be his character. So if you're looking for a subversion of a trope, I think that's it. Compare that to Aragorn, who has all of these prophecies about him and then appears as this, I am the king. He embraces it. John's not going to. Devyani, g'day, Robert, and g'day to you too. Happy to ask a question instead of opting to lurk in your replay crew. Well, great to see you. What do you think makes the Dornish people more modernized compared to other lands in A Song of Ice and Fire? Surely we can say their culture and thinking is at least a bit more modern. Why is that, and why hasn't it spread to other lands? When you're saying modern, I'm going to assume that this is a couple of things you're referring to, one of which is inheritance laws, which seem to be gender neutral. So the eldest inherits, regardless of whether that's a prince or a princess, say, and also attitudes towards sex and bastard children and things like that. They just seem to be kind of cool about it. It makes sense. They're just like, oh yeah, so Oberyn Martell, he's got a whole load of these children over there. That's all right. Whereas certainly in parts of Westeros, that would be, if not frowned upon, then certainly they wouldn't be held up in the same kind of position of honor. Automatically a part of the royal household. So why is this? Well, I think the answer, the few bits of this equation, in fact, George R. R. Martin points to the Voynich, and they had equal rights in terms of inheritance. And so when Nymeria brought those people over, and they, again, I mean, invasion isn't quite the right word. It was an mass immigration backed up by violence where necessary. And then they married into lots of the noble families. and asserted their way of doing things when it came to inheritance law. So practically speaking, that's why it is. And I think the other part of this is that you have to remember that the majority of the Seven Kingdoms, with the exception of the North, we're not 100% clear on what sort of the First Men culture is. We can just basically look at the North and assume that that's the best that we've got. But the rest of the Seven Kingdoms had largely been taken over by the Andals. And one of the key things about the Andals is that they've got their Faith of the Seven, which permeates a huge amount of their culture, and that plays into their morals and what they think is right and what they think is wrong. So the Dornish are just more relaxed about this because they were not part of the Seven Kingdoms until very recently. And when they were allowed into the Seven Kingdoms, it was with very clear rules that they could keep their own culture and traditions. They were allowed to still call for it, as the obvious example, they were allowed to still call their ruling lord a prince, or if their ruling lord happened to be a ruling lady, a princess, and they could inherit equally. James Perkins, it has been alluded to several times through the books that there is a major change brewing in Braavos. Political unrest, intrigue, assassinations, maybe even a change in Sea Lord. You have theorized that the last time there was a new Sea Lord, it likely led to the exile of Viserys and Daenerys and the collapse of the growing Braavosi-Dornish-Targaryen alliance. A new Sea Lord could represent any number of new political positions for the most powerful of the Sozi city-states. Given that the Braavosi have a slew of international interests, a long-standing dislike of dragon-riding Valyrians, strong anti-slavery inclinations, enormous debts owed to the Iron Bank and owed by the Iron Bank, and owed to the Iron Bank by the Iron Throne, and a heretical anti-death magical war brewing. What role do you see them having in the Winds of Winter and the Dream of Spring? So for those who missed my sort of theorizing on this, the backstory for Viserys and Daenerys is that they were in Braavos. That some people have other theories, but I'm reasonably certain that they were in Braavos for 6 years, and they were there, I think, pretty clearly at or living in the grounds of the Sea Lord's palace. I think all the clues are there, and frankly, where could they be safest under the protection of the most powerful person in the most powerful of the city-states, the free cities? So this all kind of adds up. Added to which, we know that the First Lord, the Sea Lord of Braavos, was there and co-signed the marriage pact between Viserys and Arianne. So clearly, he was there. He was involved. So, if we take this as a likely assumption that for the first 6 years they were there, and this is the place that Dany thinks of as the house with the red door, where she feels is home. Again, I think the clues are all there. I did do a video on this if you want any more of that information. Now, if we take all that, then we say, what happened? What made them go? And Dany was just a child at the time, so she doesn't really know or remember, but she knows that they had to leave in a rush. And she knows that the servants who were there, they stole from them. They raided where the place that they were living and took a whole load of their stuff. And they headed out from there with just the things that they could carry themselves. Now, what on earth could have led to that? Something had to lead to that. And the most logical answer that I can come up with is that there was a change of Sea Lord. The Sea Lord had, and let's not forget, this was a big political move. The Seven Kingdoms had had a civil war, and the old ruling family had lost and had fled, and they'd been given sanctuary in Braavos. That was a political move by the Braavosi, by the Sea Lord. And the reason why, very probably, was that, well, who knows? This is a new regime, Robert Baratheon. Maybe that doesn't last, and maybe the people do call for the Targaryens to come back. And if they do get back and succeed, then it would be really good if they like us, because they will owe us a big time. So that all kind of adds up. But if that Sea Lord got ousted, and we're told Braavos has this incredibly complex political structure, which there are coups, and coups generally conducted with bloodshed, and there are lots of different machinations going on at any given moment in time. We're told this, we're not shown it. We've not had any POV that's ever in the upper echelons of Braavosi society. So we're told that this is the case. And at some point, the Sea Lord will change. This seems to make sense, that the Sea Lord changes, so the political position of Braavos changes, and maybe the new Sea Lord thinks, actually, I don't want this. I don't want to be putting up the Targaryens anymore. It's very clear Robert Baratheon's reign is now set. He's established himself. He's got the Lannisters on side. There was a brief rebellion from the Ironborn that got put down. He's got allies amongst all of the main parts of the Seven Kingdoms. The only real issue is the Dornish, but they're staying quiet. So there's no reason to think that the Targaryens would get back in the near future. And so if he just, like, once they've gone from the old Sea Lord's protection, they get chucked out, that makes perfect sense. That the old Sea Lord's staff also are fleeing. And what do? They know that these Targaryens are on their way out. They just grab what they can. There's some jewels, I'm taking that, I'm going. And that makes absolute sense, because the Targaryens there, we get Viserys and Daenerys, they just have to go quickly. Everything's all over the place. They just have to leave with whatever they can grab. The servants just grab whatever they can grab, and they're gone. So that's my working theory about why they had to leave Braavos. And we've not heard that in the intervening time there has been a change in Sea Lord. But as you say, there are hints. There are hints in, we get Sam chapters, we get Arya chapters, and we don't, as I say, we don't get anyone in the upper echelons of society, so we don't know all the details of this. But there are just rumors, feelings that there are, such and such a person has been killed. This boat has come in with these people, that kind of thing, that clearly the Faceless Men are gathering information, they're trying to understand what's going on, and Arya's got no idea what's going on. Sam's not really got much of an idea what's going on, but something's going on behind the scenes. So if that something leads to a change in Sea Lord, we could expect to see a change in Braavosi policy. And Braavos doesn't just sit there as a city not doing much, as it has through the story that we know so far. Braavos does get involved. It has battles with Pentos. It has got involved in Westerosi's fighting before. It does that. In fact, there were some Braavosi ships got involved in the Dance of the Dragons. So Braavos does get involved. And the Iron Bank, at least, are very, very concerned about the return of dragons. So if this happens, if there is this change, I think what we could expect, we're told that they can build a navy very quickly. They can build a ship every day if they need to. They will create a navy. And it's possible, I wouldn't say it's definite, but it's possible that they might try to meet Daenerys' navy en route to Westeros. So that's just one of the many possibilities that we got going on. But certainly they're trying, as far as I can tell, the Iron Bank seem to be trying to find out how to kill a dragon. So Gadzooks saying, "Hi Robert, I hope you are well. It's been quite some time. I am, thank you. It's been quite some time since the last question, but I have been lurking. And hello to everyone else who's lurking as well. You're very welcome to lurk. It's not a problem at all. I love it when people are here in the chat, but if you just want to lurk, great. I've always wondered about the relationship between the North and the Riverlands, particularly or specifically how Southron Northerners viewed Riverlanders as being, and vice versa, especially considering how ready the Riverlords were to accept a king of the North as their own sovereign. On a different note, Daemon Targaryen died or survived in the Isle of Faces. I think died. We've got no hint that he survived. If he did survive, I think the implication is that he would have gone to spend time with Nettles, but we don't get any rumors of that. But on a very practical level, he started very, very high up in the sky. He did not attach himself to his dragon. He didn't chain himself onto his dragon. He leapt off of his dragon onto the other dragon that was up in the sky, stabbed his opponent, and both dragons and both riders crash landed in the lake with such force that it killed the dragons. If that landing, and bear in mind he's not cushioned anyway, if that landing was enough to kill two very massive dragons, let's not forget these are two of the biggest and most terrible dragons that Westeros has known. If that fall was enough to kill them, I think it was enough to kill Daemon. So in very practical terms, yeah, we might not have found his body, but I think he's gone. So but the bigger question there was about the relationship between the North and the Riverlands. Lorelei Dragon added to this, saying, "I've wondered about the ties between the Riverlands and the North. Were there a couple of Riverlanders in Brandon Stark's entourage when he went to King's Landing? It seems like there may have been ties there before Robert's Rebellion." Well, just in terms of that specific point, we're talking about Brandon, the brother of Ned Stark, when he headed down to King's Landing, demanding that his sister be released. He did have a little entourage. It wasn't just him. He had a little gang around him. He had a Glover from the North, an Arryn, and a Royce from the Vale, and he had a Mallister from the Riverlands. So there was indeed one person from the Riverlands, which shouldn't be too big a surprise, as he was marrying someone from the Riverlands and had been hanging out in the Riverlands for a while at Riverrun. So yes, he was making friends there. But as to the kind of the relationship between the North and the Riverlands, I mean, I think it would probably be wrong to say that it was close, because the only land link is via the neck, and that is not a hospitable land to be going through. So the two weren't close, but yes, in the years immediately before Robert's Rebellion, then a determined effort was made by the Starks to be trying to create links with, this is the Southron agenda, with southern houses, and the Riverlands was a key part of that. Before that, on a slightly more fundamental level, then we have to also look at the kind of the faith or religion aspect of this. Most of the Seven Kingdoms, most of Westeros, as we know, when the Andals came in, they converted. They went over to the faith of the Seven. But if you look at a map of Westeros, you will find that there is a part of the Riverlands that didn't. There are little dotted parts elsewhere, in like House Royce over in the Vale, for example. But in the Riverlands, there's a part in the north that didn't. And you can actually kind of map out a little curve that seems to have stayed First Men feeling. And that kind of curve goes from places like Old Stones, it goes through House Blackwood with Raventree Hall. Then we get it comes all the way down to High Heart, and then ending up with the Isle of Faces itself. Harrenhal, as we've seen, and they made a big thing of this in the TV show, also has a weirwood tree and a lot of history going on there. So we've got this kind of arc that goes on there. And that therefore has meant that there has been this kind of understanding between them, sort of a shared history, shared culture. We got a marriage between the Blackwoods and the Starks just after the Dance of the Dragons, though successive Targaryens have tried to persuade the Starks to do this, to be sort of intermarrying more to the south, and have used this argument that we do have some families who still worship the old gods in the south. And that does seem to imply that the Starks didn't know this. They kept to themselves. So are there links? Yes, there are. And they do go back hundreds of years. The cultural links go back thousands of years, but the North had kept itself to itself for a very long time. Benyovsky saying, "Hey Robert, blessings, and to you too. So, during Robert's rebellion, where did Jon Con have a real army from? The North Riverlands, the Vale Stormlands in rebellion, Dawn and the West sitting out, Iron Islands doing their thing." Where did the Targaryen army come from? Well, later on, you said the Reach were faking. You're very much right. So the army of the Reach, they did fight for a little bit and then headed down to sort of besiege Storm's End, have a big picnic in the fields outside Storm's End. Depends on whose interpretation of events you go with. So they weren't really involved. The Dornish, they were holding back until the very end, until they basically got forced to join in the Battle of the Trident. But there was an army that the Targaryens managed to pull together, that Jon Connington led, went out into the Riverlands. So where's that from? Well, loyalists is the short answer, and the Crownlands. Now, this wasn't... So the Targaryens, they had some of their own, and they had some loyalist families out there, obviously, like the Velaryons, very much always loyal. The people of Cracklaw Point see themselves as Targaryen people, but the Crownlands, if you remember, there's houses that their names crop up on a regular basis, and the places crop up whenever you get like these fighting places like Maidenpool, Duskendale, Hayford, Rosby, Stokeworth. These are significant-ish places, not too far away from King's Landing. And because they're still close to King's Landing, in the Crownlands mostly, they owe their fealty direct to the Crown. So what we're told is that during that period, the Aerys gathered together an army largely from the Crownlands. Now, some of that will be their soldiers, like their knights. Some of that will be... I can't remember whether he actually gathered some gold cloaks from King's Landing, but they were certainly there. Some of that will be people who were in King's Landing, and then the sort of the hinterlands of the Crownlands and a little bit further. So they had enough people there that they could gather together an army. Wilma26, thank you very much for the super chat. I didn't see a question attached to that. You then said, "I don't know how to work the pay thing on YouTube Live." Don't worry. If you were here a little bit earlier, you see quite how inept at technology I am. So you are in very good company. or very poor company, depending on your perspective on these things. Is that me caught up on the chat? I think it is. Right, let's go to a question from. Where were we up to? Dana the Defiant. Hi, Robert. You've told us a lot about the Golden Company in A Song of Ice and Fire and about army sizes and The Lord of the Rings. Yeah, I did a whole video about army sizes in The Lord of the Rings. That was fun. Could we have a video where you compare various sellsword companies in Essos, particularly those fighting in Meereen in the Winds of Winter? That's a good idea for a video. Maybe I will get to that at some point. I have so many ideas for videos at the moment. You should see my Excel spreadsheet. Yeah, I keep an Excel spreadsheet of all of these. So many ideas going on. But I can give you the headlines now, and the headline is that the biggest by far is the Golden Company. It's not just like the most successful, but it is the most professional, and it is the biggest sellsword company in Essos. Now, we get various numbers. 10,000 seems to be the number we're told. That seems to be 10,000 fighting men. But this includes knights in a Westerosi sense of the word, which means that they've got squires, they'll have grooms. We're told basically when they set up camp, it's like a small town, because it's not, you can't just have 10,000 men there. You have to have people who are going to be providing them with their provisions, who's going to be cutting their hair. I mean, they're camp followers. There's a whole load of people just around them, but 10,000 seems to be the sort of the accepted number, of which a significant number are knights, and also they've got elephants. The majority of other sellsword companies seem to be in numbering in the hundreds or the low thousands at most. We get a few where we have slightly more exact numbers. The Second Sons, we're told very precisely, that when Tyrion's sort of negotiating with them, and he sort of says, well, how many have you got? 500? And he's told 513 or 514 if you join. So it's like, okay, so they've got just over 500. We also know the Stormcrows have about 500. The Windblown seem to be bigger. They seem to have 2,000 or so. They're possibly the second largest. And then we hear of another couple whose names escape me, who, again, they're numbered in the hundreds. So basically, you have the Golden Company, easily the biggest, then a big gap, and then a whole load of others numbering in the mid to high hundreds or low thousands. One of the things which is quite interesting in that is Stannis, when we get him, he negotiates with the Iron Bank, gets some money. He wants to hire some sellswords, and he basically sends his man over to Essos to hire some. And he says, get me 20,000. And what that is basically mean is saying, I want all of them. Or I want all of the big sellsword companies in Essos just to come over here. He is basically saying, I want you to get the Golden Company plus the Second Sons, plus the Windblown, plus this, plus that, plus that, plus that. I want 7, 8, 9 different sellsword companies all reporting to me. That would be a significant army. Jojo Action. Ever since that House of the Dragon scene, in which Daemon tells Viserys he is a weak king and should have named Daemon as his hand, I keep on picturing that scenario and can't help but think that the two brothers would have made a pretty good match. A match that most likely would have prevented the Dance of the Dragons, if not also the Blackfire Rebellions. What do you think? And then you explain there would be no Otto, no Alicent, no Greens. Viserys would probably have married Lena, like everyone advised him to, so a fractured court would have been very unlikely. Daemon might have mellowed, because a lot of the things he did were there to prove himself to his brother, which he wouldn't need to be doing. So would this have worked? I mean, possibly. But I think a lot of this depends on your interpretation of the character of Daemon. Now, what you say is that he would have mellowed because he didn't need more power. He didn't need to prove himself to his brother. Those may well have been two of the main driving factors for Daemon. But being Hand of the King, you could have more power. You could be king. Would Daemon have wanted to be king himself if he got that close? It's possible. Do you say, I think quite right, if you were Hand of the King, then you wouldn't get Otto. And if you didn't get Otto, then you wouldn't get Alicent. And maybe even if that whole thing did happen, then maybe, Daemon probably would have been a lot stronger than just having Viserys, who was generally quite weak and didn't sort of put a stop to any of the fractures in court. Well, I think I would agree. I would, however, put a big asterisk next to all of this. I think in theory, yes, this absolutely does make sense. But in practice, my reading of Daemon is not, I mean, on the TV show, they I wouldn't say they humanized him. And I think Matt Smith has done a fantastic job with what he's been given and what he's been told to do. But he does come across as a very the reasons for him doing what he does are very clearly to do with his family there, not a personal push for power. The power does seem to be a thing that he wants, but it seems to be, on the TV show it seems to be that his brother Rhaenyra, his Achilles heels. He can't hurt them. He's just trying to support them. He loves them. So that seems to be a lot stronger in his character than we get in the books. The hints in the books are he's basically mad, bad, and dangerous to know. He is this incredibly volatile person who goes off and does things that you perhaps don't expect, can be incredibly effective, but he's not just there being the kind of person who loves his family and moves on. So would this have worked, is the asterisk. And I'm tempted to say probably no. Daemon twice got exiled from court by his brother for things that he did. And would he still have done those things? Quite possibly. Would he still have tried to be seducing Rhaenyra? Quite possibly. Maybe he wouldn't have it in him to get rid of his brother, but would he have it in him to marry the heir to the throne so that his children would inherit one day? Yeah, I think quite possibly. And how would Viserys respond to that? Again, probably the same way he did in the history that we have, exiling him. So I don't think it would have lasted for 20, 30 years. At some point, the explosiveness of Daemon would have caused some ruction, and it would have led to Daemon once more being exiled from court. The Greek word was saying, as there's always people in the chat who just say things in slightly more straightforward way than me. Maybe it's just that he had the hots for his niece. Yeah, and if he had the hots for his niece, then that would cause a problem. Let's go to Gabriel Farrell saying, "Hi, Robert. I hope you're well. I am. Thank you. Something that winds me up a lot these days on social media, of the many, many things, I know what you mean, is the constant attempts to stir up hostility between fan bases, particularly the A Song of Ice and Fire fandom and Tolkien fans. Usually, from what I've seen, it sure goes the other way. This takes the form of a Lord of the Rings account saying something along the lines of George R. R. Martin takes aim at Tolkien and says, insert Jaime versus Aragorn fight, Aragorn's tax policy, etc. But what do you think? I appreciate that it's all algorithmically induced rage bait to get responses, but it winds me up." Particularly when you see Tolkien fans talking about what an inferior writer Martin is. Like I say, I'm sure it goes the other way too, with Martin fans criticizing Tolkien. But what would I say to Tolkien fans who are convinced A Song of Ice and Fire is just lowbrow sex and violence, unworthy of being spoken about in the same breath as Tolkien's oof, and vice versa? Why is Tolkien just as relevant to the modern fantasy genre as ever? Well, yeah, I mean, I've obviously seen the same things, and I mean, I've done videos myself on, I think, all of those topics that you've said. The Jaime versus Aragorn thing, Aragorn's tax policy. These come from critiques that George R. R. Martin has made of Tolkien, and I quite enjoyed making those videos, I have to say. But I would point out, and I think I did point out in every one of those videos, George R. R. Martin loves Tolkien. George R. R. Martin is obsessed with Tolkien to an extent that most of us aren't. And what I mean by that is he reads The Lord of the Rings most years. He must have read it, because he's now getting quite old, George R. R. Martin, he must have read it dozens of times. And I mean, I struggle to think of, and I dare people to find, a long form interview that George R. R. Martin has done about his writing where he does not wax lyrical about Tolkien in some way, whether it's about the impact that Tolkien had on him personally, about the brilliance of the writing, whether it's the ending. He talks about the scouring of the Shire, the role of Frodo. He talks about so many different things in such glowing terms that if you have any respect for George R. R. Martin, you have to understand that he has the maximum respect for Tolkien. So I think that's the first thing I have to say. What Tolkien think about George R. R. Martin, I mean, it's an unfair question because Tolkien's obviously not around. But certainly, one way the love is definitely there. Now, what would I say to people who Tolkien fans? I mean, I as you can imagine, I have these kinds of conversations quite a lot, and I absolutely 100% respect anyone who likes one writer and doesn't like another writer. That's entirely up to this. Art is a very subjective matter. So if one person likes one thing and doesn't like another, okay, that's your personal thing. What I would say is that very clearly to me, George R. R. Martin is an exceptionally talented writer. I I think if you compare him to other fantasy writers, in terms of the command of language, in terms of the layering of different aspects to the book, the hints, the foreshadowing, the characterization, he's right up there. So that would be a thing that I would say. That's just my personal take, is that I think that whereas you might not enjoy the grimdark, and I completely get that, some people don't. As a talent, I personally think that it's quite hard to deny that George R. R. Martin is right up there. As for, and I've not really heard this many times, George R. R. Martin fans saying that Tolkien isn't worthy of the place. I mean, I think I don't think I need to make much of a case there. Everyone can see, I think, why Tolkien has stayed at the top and is still the fantasy. Nobody else within almost any other genre dominates it in the way that Tolkien has dominated the fantasy genre over the last few decades. Having slightly waxed lyrical about George R. R. Martin, I think the thing it's worth saying about Tolkien, though, also is he, compared to other fantasy writers, the astonishing thing is that this is not just, I'm going to write a story about this. This is, he created an entire universe, the languages, the mythologies, the history, everything. And then, having done that for decades, out of it sprouted a couple of stories. And that is completely different to how almost every other writer ever has written. most writers, George R. R. Martin is one of them, creates the stories. Obviously, has to create the world around the stories, but the wider world he created once the stories really started to hit home with people. The world of Ice and Fire, Fire and Blood, those things only happened years later. Tolkien created his entire world, and then almost as an afterthought, he created a couple of stories that came off from that. Right, let's go to Gilio saying, was there any specific character plots you were especially disappointed with from the any specific character's plot you were especially disappointed with from the Game of Thrones TV show over others? Well, I think like many, it's the characters who they were so much bigger and more important in the books. Euron is the classic example. And I'm a big fan of Pilo Asbæk. If you ever want to see him being brilliant in something, Borgen, political drama, Danish political drama, really good in that. So he's a fantastic actor. But the character that they created was not the same as the character in the book, and that was disappointing for me. And similarly, I think the Dornish plotline as a whole. The other thing, though, I mean, I'm not alone in this, but some of the characters who started out being wonderfully nuanced and clever seem to kind of lose that. Tyrion and Varys in the last few seasons, they stopped being so clever. In fact, one of the most watched videos I ever did, I don't know if people still watch it because it was very much based on like season 7, 8 of Game of Thrones, was called something like "Why has Tyrion stopped being so clever?" And I can't remember what I said, the extent to which I was trying to justify the TV show at the time. But the obvious fact is that he did. They ran out of plot, and he stopped being the clever character he was before. Caius Ballerina, thank you very much, very generous, saying tinfoil for the 5-year gap. This is the 5-year time gap. George R. R. Martin had originally wanted a 5-year time gap, basically after book 3, and he'd written in order for there to be that. He then spent a year or so trying to write what at the time he was thinking was The Dance with Dragons, but later he split that into 2, being Feast of Crows and Dance with Dragons. He spent a year trying to write after a 5-year time gap. So he created a 5-year time gap, he tried to write it, and then he realized it does not work for various reasons. So Caius Ballerina, tinfoil for it. Miss Sanday is often theorized to be a faceless man because she is incredibly educated, well-read, and compassionate. She is against slavery, thanks to her background, has allies in the Unsullied, and secretly works behind the scenes with the Shave Pate and his allies, a perfect potential leader. I think she was being set up to be Dany's successor in Meereen after she left for Westeros, not a faceless man. Okay, this is an interesting, I mean, a good tinfoil. So, Missandei, we know what she was like on the TV show. In the books, she's still a young girl. I can't remember her age off the top of my head, but she's still a young girl. And this is part of the thing which makes her impressive to Dany, but also a little bit mysterious / suspicious for us, is that she does speak a lot of languages and seems very politically savvy. And to the extent that you go, are you really that young? It seems a little bit suspicious. So I am here for the idea that there might be something more going on. And in terms of her perhaps taking over from Dany, if Dany disappeared for 5 years, then yes, potentially. Sorry, if Dany, I don't think you're suggesting actually Dany disappears for 5 years. The time break for Dany would be ruling Meereen. So basically, the way, as far as we can tell, that George R. R. Martin set it up for her was she gets to Marine and then she'll rule for 5 years, at the end of which she'll be like, oh, well, that didn't really work out. Missandei would therefore be 5 years older. Dany then disappears off on Drogon. Drogon will also be 5 years older, therefore much bigger. And who can take over? Potentially Missandei. I kind of get it. It does sort of make sense. I do feel I want to do more of a deep dive into Missandei because she is an intriguing character that we're never really, this idea that she might be a faceless man. I don't think I've seen any evidence that tells me that she is, other than these kind of like, well, she seems to know quite a lot for a child. So that feels to me like we're kind of like reaching for what kind of matches, what might work. Well, that would work. So maybe there's another solution. I don't know. It's good tinfoil because it goes into what I think is a gap here in the not in the narrative, but a gap in our understanding of what's going on. It's possible she is just very clever. In which case, fine, we'll just move on, and she'll be roughly the same character in the books as she was on the show. But the idea that there's something else going on there, it may be that gets lost without that 5-year gap. There are some things which may well have been lost because of the 5-year gap. So yeah, I think it's one of those ones where George R. R. Martin would say, keep reading. Right. Let's go to question from Ranabir Mitra saying, salutations, Robert and Dan the dog. I hope you're well and excited for Sonny Lummons as our new goalkeeper. Yes, if we can reduce the goalkeeping errors, then that would be quite a good thing. Love to the moderators and to the fellow Patreon members. So, question: have you come across theories in the fandom or past Reddit posts claiming that the others are shadows, as in the icy version of Melisandre's shadow babies? In the prologue, the phrase twins to the first, and George R. R. Martin's statement saying that he is not sure if they had a culture when an artist asked him to describe the others, and he used the word she, adds credence. That's the she, not as in female she, but as in the fairy people of like more kind of Irish mythology. Basically, in a fantasy world where ice and fire are dual complements to one another, is it not possible that if Melisandre's ritual below Storm's End was carried out using ice magic instead of fire, then the resultant shadow babies are basically the others? So yeah, there's a lot going on here. First of all, the culture thing. Yes, this is something you can Google. This is something George R. R. Martin did say a long time ago, when asked about the others by an artist, about what sort of culture they had. He said, and I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but he said something along the lines of, "Well, I'm not sure they have a culture as we would understand it." And then he talks about the she, Sidhe. So basically, the fairy, like, and this is like the mysterious, not Disney fairies. It's kind of mysterious, almost ununderstandable elfin figures in a slightly from the different realm who come and steal babies and have their own agendas. That kind of trickstery being. And I do wonder, and we just have this quote. I wasn't there when he said this, so we just or obviously staring over his shoulder while he was typing it. I do wonder whether we kind of like overinterpret that, because clearly, even from the very first, there is a culture of some kind. We see them in the prologue for book 1, and and we're told about them laughing, some of them stepping back to allow one person to do something. We're told that they've got armor, they've got swords, so clearly there's some kind of smithing going on. There is what I think you and I would probably describe as culture there. There is a civilization of some kind. I think what he is trying to get at there is that this is different to our understanding of culture. This is different to our understanding of what human life is like. They are a different type of life, and as a result, us trying to superimpose human ideas onto them, that doesn't quite work. They should be mysterious. I think that's what he's saying there. Now, as for the shadow babies thing, you sort of go on in the second part of this talking about the 3-page draft that George R. Martin had, the original 3-page draft that he had for the Song of Ice and Fire trilogy. He described the others as the Neverborn. If you imagine what happened with the Shadow Baby's birth from Melisandre, we can surmise that George is keeping this concept of the Neverborn alive in the story via the Shadow Babies and minimal exposure we see of shadow binding. Do you agree with my hypothesis here? The fandom has an understanding that George abandoned the Neverborn idea from his original outline, but I claim he has not. The others are simply the ice version of what we saw with Melisandre. This gives even more credence to the toy that we were mentioning ago, the sort of figurine that George R. Martin had sanctioned around an ice Melisandre. Okay, so we will come to Shadow Babies in just one moment, but I think this Neverborn, which is a word, a phrase he used, I think is an interesting one. Because it implies that they were not born, they're not like a race like normal humans that have been sort of like, there's a mummy other and a daddy other, and then they fall deeply in love, and then they emerge as a little baby other. That's not how this works. That seems to be what he's suggesting here. They come into being or came into being in another way entirely. So what might that mean? Well, I think that means we can't immediately dismiss. In fact, I think there's suggestions that this is in the right ballpark, that this idea that we have that on the TV show where they were created, the Night King, as they had it, was created by the others by plunging the dragon glass into the heart in front of the weirwood tree and doing some magic at the same time. And that therefore means that the others are they're not born, they are created. So they are never born. That is one possibility. Another possibility that I've not really explored, but I've often wondered about is, might they have been brought into this world from their own realm in some way, which plays with this idea of the fairy, who have their own realm, and then they sort of come into the human realm every now and then for their own purpose. Might that be what it is? Might they just be eternal beings who always have been there, and just the gateway has been opened for some reason? So there are plenty of ways. I personally don't buy into the idea that George R. R. Martin has abandoned the never-born concept. I think the never-born concept is actually pretty central to our understanding of what the others might be. I think it explains that they're not just generations and generations and generations, which again, it kind of matches up with what George R. R. Martin, it seems to be pointing us towards, which is the fact that the others that we've seen are male, with possibly one exception in the legends of the Night Queen. So, all of that said, how does that link in with the Shadow Babies thing? In my mind, and I might be too literal about this, but a Shadow Baby, as we saw it being created by Melisandre, was literally born. So whether you think that is it should be more figurative language, but it's almost against, as if George R. Martin is saying this is the opposite of what's going on over there. As for shadow magic, I don't know whether I would say we've not seen huge amounts about it. I think we have seen Melisandre use it. I think we've seen Mary Mazdur use it. So I think that we have had bits of it out there, and it doesn't seem to be fire or ice. Melisandre kind of makes this rather tortured analogy about, how do you get shadows if you don't have light and fire? Of course, that's what creates them. Therefore, the shadows are obeying the Lord of Light, which kind of sort of makes sense theoretically. But the idea that we've got shadow babies are therefore fire, and you could have an alternate shadow baby that's ice. I don't think that they are ice or fire. I think they're shadow. If that makes sense. A reflective rambling question picking out. Thank you very much. I love it when people do this. And Brian Valco saying, "What's your own personal predictions for Jane Westerling?" Right. So Jane Westerling is Robb Stark's widow, and where we have left her in the plot is that Jaime got her. So Robb Stark's he's been killed, and we now come forward, and I'd have to look at the exact timelines, but it's something like 5 or 6 months. The extent to which Jaime looks at her and thinks, "Well, you're still kind of thin. I'm reasonably confident you're not pregnant." So that's the kind of time frame we're looking at. And he then says, "Okay, so I'm going to send you back off to the Westerlands." This is after he's taken River Run. He says, "I'm going to send you back to the Westerlands with Edmure as well, and I'm going to lock you up for 2 years. Make sure everybody's very aware you've not had a baby. 2 years is way too long. We're aware of this, but I want 0% chance that anyone can ever say she's had Robb Stark's heir." So that's the situation. And the last thing we see is that from her is that he sends her off in this kind of wagon train heading west. And he gets a bit nervous, and he starts off and he says, "I'm going to have 100 men guarding them." And then he goes, "Oh, actually, Brotherhood Without Banners are out there. I don't know where the Blackfish has gone. I let his garrison out, didn't I? They had 200 men. Let's double it. We'll go from 100 to 200." And then before they go, he says, "Actually, let's double it again." So we've got a big wagon train, lots of 400 Lannister soldiers, all heading off west. Now, what's my personal theory? Well, George R. R. Martin has said that she is going to be in the prologue to the next book. Doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be from her POV, but we will see her in the prologue. Now, I think it is very likely that wagon train is going to be attacked. Jaime is right. Jaime is, the more you read his chapters, the more you realize that although he comes across, and most people treat him as just being like, oh, he's just like the golden boy, he's good at fighting, he's actually kind of insightful and quite clever. He's picked up a lot from his father. He thinks a lot like Tyrion at times. So he does kind of understand what's going on. And he's right. There are lots of people who would want to stop that wagon train. So almost certainly someone will. And almost certainly, in my view, the prologue to the next book is going to be that attack. He gave orders, though, that if anyone gets close to rescuing them, if they, either her or Edmure, step off of that road, then they are to be shot. And Fully Prester, the guy he's put in charge of this, who seems like quite a good guy, actually. I mean, to the extent that Jaime, he even thinks, he wouldn't be a bad pick as Hand of the King, actually. Another point, he compares him to like an innkeeper, just very sensible. He sort of like pushes back and says, "Are you sure? I mean, Jane Westerling, she's actually a Westerner. We know her. She's from our part of the world. Do we really need to kill her?" And Jaime's like, "Yeah, we cannot allow her to escape. We cannot allow the chance that somebody will be able to say, here is Robb Stark's widow, maybe even Robb Stark's child, people would rally around, and I cannot allow that. So, if I had to guess, we are going to see an attack on the train. Possible, I hate to say it, but it's possible that she might die in that attack. I don't think she's going to have a huge impact in the story going forward. What that prologue, though, is going to do is it's going to establish a huge amount of things. I think we're going to see Nymeria's wolf pack. I think we're going to see the start of the fight back to reclaim the Riverlands. I think we will start to see issues about the succession, the Stark succession raised as well. So I think we're going to see a whole load of things. But first chapter, 50-50 chance she might die. If she does survive, I don't think she's going to play a huge role going forward. Sorry. I think I need another question in the chat. Thufir, what are the most likely mysteries? This is reflective rambling. Pick up a question for Thufir. Thank you very much. What are the most likely mysteries that will not be resolved by the end? What will? I don't think we'll ever learn where whores go. Yeah. So what will? I mean, George R. R. Martin has sort of told us a few that we will learn. For example, I'm currently writing, because people do ask about this a lot, I'm currently writing what happened to Tyrek Lannister. And spoilers, I always spoil my videos in advance. George R. R. Martin did say we will find out later on. So that's one we will find out about. Where will whores go? Or where do whores go? Is, for those who do not know, this is a question which is running around Tyrion's head. So he basically, just before he kills his father, he sort of like asks his first wife, who he was very much in love with, Tywin. Tragic story, but Tywin basically sent her away after some terrible things. Sent her away, and Tyrion goes, "Well, where is she?" And Tywin's like, "I don't know. Where do whores go?" And that plays around Tyrion's mind. I think that we will find out. I think on that one we will definitely find out. I think the things which we won't necessarily 100% find out are the kind of ones they just kind of left up there as possible. Like, is Tyrion really a Targaryen? Or is Cersei really a Targaryen? That kind of thing. He will drop some hints. I think he's not going to tell us outright. But who's Jon's mother and parentage, that will definitely be made clear, I think. And any of the plot-specific things, like what's going on with the Winterfell crypts, that kind of thing, we will find out about. Knuckle drums. In the show, we see a clip of a dragon's silhouette over King's Landing with holes in the wings like a dead dragon. Likelihood of a dead dragon and the dead making it to King's Landing in the books for the final battle of winter. Okay, so yes, we saw that. That was okay, I'm dredging my mind a little bit here, because that image, and you'll remember the image that we saw of a dragon. We saw it from quite early on, of a dragon shadow going over King's Landing. That was connected in the showrunners' minds when they were wanting to do the kind of like the end point of when Dany burned King's Landing. They wanted to tie this in with the idea of the Mad King, who's the burn them all kind of thing. And they wanted that to be sort of echoing backwards and forwards a little bit. We don't know exactly how they're going to handle that, but they sort of abandoned that idea and just went for the simple one. So that's where that image originally came from in their minds. Does this? Are we going to see a dead dragon and the dead making it to King's Landing in the books for the final Battle of Winter? My instinct is no, not to King's Landing. The others there are a few places where we could see the others because they're kind of connected with it. The wall, clearly, and they will breach the wall in some way. The wall has been set up as the barrier to the others, so they have to come up with it and get past it somehow. Winterfell is set up as being a defensive structure in some way with um, the crypts and things like that. So that is another place they will clearly, I think, get to. And then we get the Isle of Faces, which is, as we've already discussed, we don't know all the details, but the hub of the Weirwood network in some way. And if it is, then, and if the others are inextricably connected to the Children of the Forest in roughly the way we think, that makes sense for them to be going there. So that seems to be the lowest bit of Westeros where we've got some kind of imagery. That Dany did at one point have a dream of the Trident and her on seeing these sort of ice figures, and she's flying above on Drogon. But that seems to be more in the context of, yes, a little bit of Azor Ahai imagery, but also a linking into Rhaegar. This is thinking about the Battle of the Trident. So I think probably they won't get that far. A dead dragon is an interesting one. Clearly on the show, we did have a dead/ice dragon. The others aren't going to get that. That episode going beyond the wall, the Night King throwing the javelin, the chains pulling, all of that. The showrunners have said they came up with that. That was their idea. The idea that the others, the White Walkers, should get a dragon. That was their idea. So that did not come from George R. R. Martin. There is a strong possibility, we've talked about this in other streams, there is a strong possibility that Euron might get one of the dragons. And Euron is playing with, and particularly as and when he hooks up with Cersei, with kind of death magic. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that we get a sort of a dead dragon. But it's not a definite by any stretch of the imagination. Sir Tony said, what story arc or scenes or set of scenes are you most looking forward to in Winds? For me, it's how it left off with Jaime and Brienne. Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by what happens there. I think, I mean, it's kind of hard to just pick out one or two. I always enjoyed Tyrion's chapter. I mean, let's go with whose chapters I enjoy. I always enjoyed Tyrion's chapters. And the meeting, as we were talking about a bit ago, the meeting between him and Daenerys is going to be absolutely fascinating. How that works out. The Cersei chapters and the Fagon attack on King's Landing, I think I cannot wait. How she reacts to her uncle Kevin being killed is going to be explosive. In many senses of the word. So that I'm really can't wait for. And then also, rather obviously, up at the wall, what happens with Jon. And the thing I'm most excited about is that we have to see this somehow. We have to see this through someone's point of view, which means we're going to, as in what happens next, which means we've got two options. Either we get to see it through Melisandre's POV, and George has created this POV for us, and that will be amazing. Or we see it through Jon's POV when he's walked into Ghost, which would be even more amazing. So either perspective we have on that will be brilliant. So yeah, there's lots to look forward to, obviously. Did I have another question? Yes, Caius Ballerina picking up a question for Marcus Vunda, saying, hi, Robert. I wonder if when Jon dies and walks into Ghost, we were talking about this just a moment ago, is it possible that Bloodraven can directly talk to him inside Ghost, like when Bran sees Hodor in his mind? It's entirely possible. So I think one of the issues that we have is drawing a line around magic. is that, well, that's how it works because that's how we've seen something work. There will be, in the next book, there will be magic we have not seen before. There will be magic we do not understand. There will be different things going on. You were able to push magic further than we thought before, particularly when we get to the wall, where magic apparently is even more powerful. Certainly Melisandre thinks that. So, is it possible that Bloodraven would be able to talk to Jon inside inside Ghost? Well, yes. Now, what you're talking about with Bran and Hodor is we get a few references that Bran goes into and takes over Hodor, and he says he can still feel Hodor cowering, and I can't remember the exact words, but this is the feel, cowering in the corner of his brain. And he does try and reassure him. He sort of says to him, "It's okay. It's only me. I'm not going to hurt you. I'll be gone soon." So he does try to communicate, and as far as we can tell, that gets through. So might Bloodraven, who obviously is a very, very powerful skin changer, might he be able to do that? Yes, it's entirely possible. And this does add into the idea that if we buy into Jon having walked into Ghost, which I think most people have, and that's how he survives. And if we also buy into the idea that he is going to come back, which I think most of us again buy into, then his body, frozen or whatever, defrosted, is back there. Somebody has to nudge him back into the body, because he very probably, this is one of the things we get from Varamir Sixskin's prologue, he probably won't want to go. He'll probably be very happy there in Ghost's body. So Bloodraven, my best guess at the moment is that Bloodraven, when he sees that the body is ready, he will push Jon out of Ghost. So he has to go back into his own body. The extent to which we see him communicate with Jon is a different matter. But I think he will be there and make have a significant contribution, let's put it that way. Okay, question from Phantom Earth saying there's a lot of notable appearances of comets in the A Song of Ice and Fire world. What do you make of this? Could this be to do with the unstable orbit of Planetos? Well, I think there are two things here. The first is that George R. R. Martin tends not to like discussions of unstable orbits and things like this. He, a number of times, when it's something has been put to him about the unbalanced seasons, and someone says to him, "Are the seasons unbalanced because Planetos?" The world that we're on, if you didn't know, it's called Planetos. That's the name that we generally give it. Is that because Planetos is kind of like wobbling like this in its orbit, or it got knocked out of the way, and so it's got like a weirdly shaped orbit? Is that what's going on? And every time George R. R. Martin says, "No, no, 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 no. You're looking for a scientific explanation. There is no scientific explanation for the seasons being out of balance. This is a magical world. There's a magical explanation." So I think the first thing to say there is the unstable orbit is something I suspect George R. R. Martin himself would reject, which means that we have to not be thinking about that in terms of what's going on with all of the comets and meteors and stuff like that. So what is going on with them? Well, there are, as you said, there's a lot of notable appearances. I think it's easy to overstate the number of these. We get the Red Comet, which happens at the end of Game of Thrones, start of Clash of Kings, is notable. There are also a few other times when there was one when baby Aegon was born, that kind of thing. So there are comets and shooting stars and things like that, but there are in our world as well. So I wouldn't overstate it that we get a meteorite apparently with the Lightbringer, but it's not like they happen all the time. So I don't think it's a matter of this, for whatever reason, this world has been placed in somewhere where the sky is filled with all of this. It's that they are magical, them happening, but it's at a normal-ish level. Now, the extra layer I would add to that personally is that George R. Martin is definitely playing on this idea, which is very common in fantasy fiction and mythology generally, which is that magic comes from above. And so we have, and this is very much kind of a staple of mythology, which is why you get Middle Earth, which is the same as Midgard, the middle bit, and you get a lower bit and you get an upper bit. Asgard, you get in Norse mythology, and so that's like above, middle, and below. And so, as a result, things which are up there in the sky, comets and the like, often, as a trope, bring magic or are. I mean, there are many. I'm sure you can think of them. Many fantasy stories where comets, even stories in our own world where comets and shooting stars and mysterious new stars in the night sky herald things. The Christmas story has a star which heralds things, which plays out into a huge amount of sort of other literature. So I don't think that there's personally, I don't think there's a huge mystery to this. But and Phantom Earth saying first time commenting, long time listener. Well, thank you very much and welcome. I know you've been a long time listener, but welcome. So I don't think there's a huge mystery here. If the mystery is there, it's not a scientific mystery; it's a magical mystery. Sebastian Holden. What's the meaning of the young weirwood in the Whispers in A Feast for Crows? Brienne kills men there. Does blood activate weirwoods? She starts having strange visions after this event. Is this Bran or Bloodraven? Okay, so yes, in Feast for Crows, she heads off to the Whispers, sort of really out of the way. Old castle, abandoned castle, often a wild goose chase. There's like many of those Brienne chapters, and I have to admit, the first time I read those Brienne chapters, I was like, "Why are we doing this?" But she goes. I now look back and think that a lot of them are really good world-building chapters. So she goes there and she kills 3 people, and there's a weirwood tree. There's a young weirwood tree, a new weirwood tree, which is just kind of sprouting up in this very out of the way place. What's that about? I think, yes, there's a thematic thing, that it's the weirwood trees. We're told often, the weirwood trees, there are no weirwood trees anymore in the south. And yet, when you start looking around, weirwood trees do pop up all over the place. And I think this is kind of at a kind of thematic level. This is sort of saying, well, the weirwoods, they've not given up. They're still there underground. And when a place is abandoned and left alone, a weirwood tree will appear. They're reclaiming their own, as it were. So I think there's that element. I think that the fact that she kills people there by the weirwood tree, yes, weirwood trees seem to, as part of their magic, all magic seems to need sacrifice of some kind. So sacrificing people to a weirwood tree, even if she's doing it unintentionally, perhaps we could see that as unleashing some magic of some kind. So this is an unintentional thing. I don't think that this is like suddenly a massive character shift for Brienne. I don't think that that's what we're talking about here, but I think that we're talking about thematic things that are going on. But is Bran or Bloodraven intervening? I mean, possibly. I think the thing with Bran, and another video I'm writing at the moment is about how powerful Bran is. And the more I look into it, the more I think we've not yet, we all instinctively know Bran's going to get more powerful, but we've not seen him do the powerful things yet, some of which have already happened. For example, I can't remember, I did a short on this. I'm not sure whether that's come out yet. It'll be on this channel if I did. I think it's going to come out at some point next week. But anyway, it was like, how many people do you think Bran has talked to through the Weirwood network? And by which I mean him saying something and them hearing it on the other side. Because when you start counting, it seems to mostly be his family. Yes, we know we got that one with Ned. When his first time he's there, he's just had the weirwood paste and he's like going through the weirwood tree in Winterfell, and he calls out to his father, and Ned like looks up what's going on. Another time he's like, who's there? So there's Ned. He clearly, it's not much of a conversation, but that's there. When when Theon is in Winterfell, he hears the tree calling out his name. And he hears the name Bran being said, and he looks at the weirwood tree and thinks it looks like Bran. Now, Theon perhaps is not the most reliable of POV characters at that moment in time, but that clearly implies that Bran is trying to speak through that weirwood tree to him. Then we get in dreams, both Jon and Arya have dreams where there are weirwood trees. One in Bran speaks to Jon through a weirwood tree in one of his dreams. There's a weirwood tree, and when Arya has a wolf dream, she sees a weirwood tree watching her go by. And when she's in Harrenhal, she has a conversation with a weirwood tree. And the weirwood tree, check it out. And she hears what she thinks is her father's voice, but some people think actually that doesn't necessarily sound like her father. Maybe that's actually Bran. So again, you add up all these things. There's Sansa, even when she's sleeping, it was not in front of a weirwood tree, but in the Heart Tree in King's Landing. She thinks that she dreams that Bran is there and smiling at her through the tree, effectively. So Bran has done a huge amount of things through the weirwood tree, and we have not. And this is the crucial point. And I say I'm doing this as a short. It's quite a long short to make at this point, but it's quite a crucial point. I think that we've seen him do the trying to talk to his father. We've not seen these other times, which means that those things are going to happen in the future, which makes us wonder what else has he done in the story we've already read that is him that we don't know about. Might there even, dare I say it, be times that I have blamed Bloodraven, but actually it's Bran? So I think the jury is still out on how much Bran has been doing. He is going to be very powerful and he will be doing a lot of manipulating, but we just do not know what yet. Yeah, True Yellow Darts is saying Robert makes some of the longest shorts I've seen on YouTube. He should call them mediums. Thank you. If maybe YouTube should create an entirely new category for me. Right. So let's go to CK. Do you think it's possible for George R. R. Martin to complete the story and all the major character arcs in 2 books? I think he wants the symmetry of 7 books, but I think he's bumping his head against the wall. Okay, so yes and no is the short answer. The yes answer is if he wants to, but they've got to be really big books. The short answer, the no bit is I'm 100% with you in what I suspect you're thinking, which is could he, in sort of 2 published volumes, do it? And the answer, I think, is a no. So where I come from on this is to say, if you think about the Winds of Winter and what we think roughly the arc of the Winds of Winter is at a very high level, it's going to take us from where we're at now, very broadly, I think, and most people seems to think something around this, not necessarily the same, but something around this. It'll take it to roughly the point in time when Dany has arrived in Westeros, perhaps landed at Dragonstone with her invasion fleet, and the others maybe have reached the wall. So that's the kind of the point at which we're going to get at. And we've got a lot of story to pack into that. We've got all of the Fagon stuff going on. We've all got the Dornish plot, whatever's going on up in the north, the Riverlands. We've got lots of plot to fit into that. And that is the next book. That, based on my figurings out and what George R. Martin has said in the past, when he sort of said, "Oh, I'm 75% of the way through. I've done 1,200 pages." We're looking at 1,600 pages, which is going to be broken down into at least 2 volumes, maybe even 3 volumes. So already we're saying we've got one more book, which is going to be broken down into 2 or maybe even 3. Then you say, can he finish off that story in 1 volume? And then you have to think, well, what has to happen in that? A lot. A lot has to happen. We don't know exactly everything which is going to be having to happen, but we assume that Jon and Dany have to meet. We assume that we have to get to the end of all of these, the Vagon plot lines. We have to have the others dealt with. We have to have the dragons dealt with. Euron has to. Is that going to be done in 1 book? Again, I maybe, but you'd have to break it down into several shorter volumes. So, is it possible? Yes. Do I think it's possible that he might turn around at some point and say, "Well, I've been thinking about this. Actually, it's not going to be 7; it's going to be 9." It would also make sense to me. Let's have a quick flick through. Wilma 26. I don't know if this was the question that you were wanting to ask earlier with the super chat, but or whether this is what you want to ask now. You've added Stephanie Frederick and said, wondering if Robert's view on how Euron Greyjoy will impact the finale has changed since his videos on the subject and House of the Dragon. Well, I can't remember when my videos on the subject with Euron were, probably a while ago. I don't think House of the Dragon has changed my views on Euron at all. And I think I'm still of the view that he is the most likely Saruman figure in this, by which I mean we've got the scouring of the Shire, which George R. Martin has said that's sort of his template for how he wants the A Song of Ice and Fire to be ending thematically, not in terms of reality, but thematic, not in terms of detail, but thematically, which means our heroes have done the big battles and things like that, and then they kind of turn around and heading back to home. But before they can make everything right again, they've got one final baddie that has to be dealt with, a bad guy that has to be dealt with. So that's the idea, and Euron kind of fits that bill for me. So, in terms of his end game, I think he's going to be sweeping across huge amounts of southwest Westeros, having allied himself with Cersei and Qyburn, and is just going to be doing every kind of magic and stuff that you could possibly imagine, and destroying things left, right, and center. So that is it. And then our heroes somehow have to conquer that. But I can't remember what I said in my previous videos on the subject. Stephen Donnelly saying it is painfully tantalizing to think there are actually 2 physical books worth of material already in existence, albeit unedited. Not all POVs done, and some of those chapters already released. Um, yeah, I mean, there's he has done a lot. He has done a lot of writing, and yeah, we will see it at some point. We will. It's frustrating, but the fact that we've got so many pre-release chapters is because I don't think we're going to get any more. But I think that there's um uh, a it has to be a good thing that's there. Okay. Corvus Art saying, is the Scouring of the Shire about a final bad guy or using the skills they developed over the story? It's about both. But it's using the skills they've developed and the growth that they've had during the story, and with a bad guy who is there, who is preventing them from getting the rewards and the going back home. So that's what it is. So the focus is not on who the bad guy is. The focus is on our heroes. But you do need a bad guy, if that makes sense. All right. Callie Summers, other cultures have long night equivalents, but now the others are only in Westeros. Will we hear of other rumours, or is Westeros special in some way? I think we will hear of other rumours. Yes, so rumours of what we had in the first long night was, and the legends are different, but coming down at the sort of the far east of northeast of Essos. So do we expect that? I mean, legends, rumors, yes, but I think that's all we're going to get really. By the end of the Winds of Winter, the action will be all focused over on Westeros. We've got 2 sets of action in Essos at the moment. We've got Arya in Bravos, and then we've got Dany, who was in Marine, but obviously is now up in the Dothraki Sea, but will be returning there. So once those 2 hubs of action have moved over to Westeros, we're just going to be hearing rumours from Essos. TK, do you find it odd that magic during the height to the Targaryen dynasty is almost unfelt, but in the current series with 3 dragons, we're talking about wargs, krakens, blood magic, and the others? To an extent. So during the height of the Targaryen dynasty, if you're talking about things like the Dance of the Dragons, we don't really know what was going on over in Essos. And so there might well have been a whole load of magic going on there. As for Krakens, we get several mentions of them in Fire and Blood. For example, as for wargs, they clearly did appear. We get Bloodraven, and up north of the wall as well, but they had to be in secret south of the wall because people found them quite suspicious. It's only really that the Starks and nobility that people are not really pushing them on it. It has to be said. Blood magic and things. Yeah. So I take your point. I think what I was trying to do there as a starting point of the answer is to say there clearly was magic back when the Targaryens were at the height of their power. There were magicy things going on. Certainly, if you take the generation around Bloodraven and when he's in power, there's a huge amount of magic going on. He's a magic user. Shira Seastar's a magic user. We get Eris the First, who's researching it. It would appear into magical things. We get Aemon talking about all of his brothers had dragon dreams. So there's a lot of magic-y stuff going on at that time. We just don't read about it all. And if you read through Fire and Blood, you'll find all the time these rumors of magic, like this was a magic user there's a magic user over there, that kind of thing. So there are rumors of magic, but so that's the starting point, but I take the point that there is more magic happening now, and this is when the story is happening. So I don't find it that odd. The ambient, I talked about this briefly earlier, the ambient level of magic in the world has gone up with the reintroduction of dragons, which means that we get glass candles working, which means we get fire mages and Karth being able to do more impressive magic. The pyromancers saying, hey, any chance of dragons being born around here? Because our fire magic is a lot easier these days. So it's the return of the dragons has allowed a whole lot more magic to happen. Right, and let's go to we had a question. Sorry, just a very quick. This was Ranabe Mitra. Just a quick jumping over to Lord of the Rings here. You were saying it is said that during the seventh, the last, was born out of Dine Ironfoot's line, and he claimed back Khazad-dûm. Post which they stayed there. This is back in the Fourth Age, well after the Lord of the Rings. After which they stayed there, thriving till the end of the days. Into the end of days. Is it fair to say that during the time of the New Shadow, which was the sequel to the Lord of the Rings that Tolkien 3 times tried to write and 3 times abandoned, dwarves are still present, maybe in the Iron Hills or Khazad-dûm, if one of the stories involves Borlas searching for them, maybe. Basically, as the dominion of man increased in the Fourth Age, how long do you foresee the remaining dwarves lasting in Middle-earth? So the way Tolkien writes it, and he deliberately doesn't major on the Fourth Age, he deliberately doesn't give us huge amounts of detail about this, is that the Fourth Age is, as you say, the dominion of man, which means that the magical things are going. Smaug's already been killed. The elves have headed off to the west. Sauron and Saruman have gone. Gandalf has returned. The orcs are basically all wiped out. So all of these magical creatures and beings are gone, and so humanity's there in charge. The dwarves, however, they're not going anywhere. The way that Tolkien writes is basically they just keep on digging and delving deeper and deeper, and they're not talking to the outside world. So they get lost to myth and legend over time, and that's what he's saying. I mean, it's probably worth pointing out that Durin the Seventh was the king of Durin's folk, the Longbeards, which is the one of the 7 clans of dwarves that we know the most about. But we shouldn't forget that there are other clans of dwarves out there who will have their own stories. In particular, there are 4 in the east that we know almost nothing about. But I think the implication is that they, like Durin's folk, just return to doing what dwarves do. And so Durin, we're not told exactly when Durin the Seventh retakes Khazad-dûm, but I think it's something around the year 130. And then after that, they slowly fade. Nuclear Eagle Fox. My tinfoil theory is that Ghost is from a different litter from the other wolves. Explains why they didn't find him at first and why his eyes are open. Yeah, it's an interesting theory. So he was apart from the other wolves. I think the implication that George R. R. Martin is wanting us to go away with is that he was like the runt of the litter. And so that's why he was different, and he had to be kept apart because of thematically, John was seen to be different. The fact that if he did, and this is where I'd like this bit of tinfoil, if he was from a completely different litter, that actually symbolically makes more sense for John, because if that is his direwolf, then yes, he's related to the other ones, but it's not from Ned, as everybody assumes. So yeah, I like it. I don't think we will ever find out, but it's a nice little theory. Okay, let's go to Commander Ray, I was wanting to talk about the prologue of Book One and how it foreshadows much of the larger plot. In particular, how you view the behaviour of the others in this chapter and the fact that they seem to be hunting Night's Watch and further in the book attempting to assassinate officers. To me, this shows a degree of awareness to the threat and points to the Night's Watch having been critical in the defeat of the others. But it also makes me question what information they have and how they got it. I particularly find it interesting that they, perhaps reading too much into it, seem to be looking for someone in particular. Not unlike the living who act on prophecy, they don't immediately go to war, they're biding their time. But why it all seems strange unless they are acting on preternatural knowledge. To me, I think the others are trying to prevent the prince that was promised from fulfilling his destiny, which makes them more interesting and formidable than just ice zombies. Any thoughts? Yes, so we had Joe Magician just randomly in the chat a while ago. This is something that he has championed as he comes out with a lot of ideas which are not necessarily mainstream fandom ideas, but they work. And they kind of challenge a lot of what we think. And so he has definitely do go and check it out somewhere. I'm sure there's a video on it. He has got this idea that what the others were doing in that prologue was testing to see whether Waymar Royce was perhaps Azor Ahai. And in particular, maybe he was Jon Snow. Now, I can't say that that's not the case because we simply do not have the information. What I can say is that I don't think it's needed in order for us to understand what was going on in that scene. What happened, just to kind of remind you, is that so Waymar Royce is there. They've discovered the bodies have gone. Suddenly gets very cold, and then the others kind of emerge, and he's there, and he's got his sword, and they kind of form this semicircle around him, and then one of them comes forward and starts fighting, and then his sword is so cold it breaks Waymar Royce's sword. They all laugh, and he goes in for the kill. That's a very high level. That's what happens. Now, what is going on there? Well, what we know is that they seem to be targeting the leaders because Waymar Royce was obviously the leader of those three. He was the person giving the orders, and he was where we're told he was wearing nice clothes compared to what the others were wearing. Not the others were wearing, you know what I mean, but the other two Night's Watchmen were wearing. Then we get the two whites who get get discovered by Ghost, get taken into Castle Black, and they attack the leadership, Jeremy Riker, Gerald Mormont. And then obviously we get seemingly targeted hits on Benjen, so Benjen's group. So they do seem to be hunting for the leaders of the Night's Watch. And then the other thing we know is that the sword was important. Waymar Royce's sword is important. The fact that it broke made them happy in some way. We don't know the psychology of others, but they seem to have been laughing. They seem to go, great. So what do I take from that? Well, I think clearly they're intelligent and worked out that the Night's Watch, if you go after the leadership, that's probably a good thing. But also it implies that they are wary of the Night's Watch in some way, which tallies with the story that we have of the Battle for the Dawn, which says that the Night's Watch were the people who won the fundamental battle against them. There was this battle between the first Night's Watch and the others were pushed back. So it makes sense that they're wary of the Night's Watch. But what are they particularly wary of is the sword. Now, are they wary? Do they wonder, is this Lightbringer? Instinctively, Lightbringer is fiery, so they would have been able to see it wasn't Lightbringer. But could it have been a Valyrian steel sword? I think the implication, I'm not going to go through all of the workings out to get there, but I think the implication is that Valyrian steel swords, or dragon steel, as they were probably known at the time, those were the weapons that shifted the balance of the fight against the others back in the first long night. And the first Night's Watch had them, and that was how they managed to win that fight. That seems to be the implication. So the others return after thousands of years, find the Night's Watch. Here's the person who's got the fancy armor and things like that. They fight, and then the sword breaks. That is not Valyrian steel. That's not the thing which did us in last time. They're happy. They laugh. That explains it all. Is there another layer that they're specifically hunting for a person? Perhaps, but I don't think we've got enough evidence yet to say that is definitely the case. But I think we do know that they were wary of swords, probably in general, not specifically a sword, and that they are clever enough to be trying to eliminate the leadership of the Night's Watch. Hyos Ballerina, what do you think Orain Waters' goal is? Just plundering? Will he eventually meet up with Dany? He is a dragon seed after all. A suggestion, a stream on the less prominent witches or magic users in A Song of Ice and Fire. It's nice idea. Yes, maybe we'll do that at some point. Orain Waters. So Orain Waters is a Velaryon bastard who Cersei has as master of ships in her small council. He, however, takes the ships. He seems not unintelligent and sees which way the wind is blowing. He takes his ships and heads off, abandons the cause, and last seen, we think, in the Stepstones. So what's the aim? Well, although we've heard rumors about Dany and the dragons, they're still just rumors and not that she's on the way with a massive fleet. So that doesn't seem to be, he doesn't seem to be there going to her in some way. Is he just going to be like all those others who have set up in the Stepstones and act as pirates? Very possibly. However, that doesn't mean that when Dany and her fleet come through, because they have to go through the Stepstones if they're going to come up to somewhere around Dragonstone King's Landing. If her fleet comes through with 3 dragons flying overhead, might Orain Waters suddenly go, this is the horse I wish to back, or the dragon I wish to back. I'm going to join up with them. It's entirely possible. So in answer to your question, I don't think Orain Waters has a long-term plan right here, right now. But I think, other than I think he's being a bit piratical in the Stepstones, he may well join up with Dany anyway. Let's go to Magmafrost. Question. Something has been bothering me for a while that took place during the deaths at Winterfell in the Dance with Dragons. So there are 6, 7 murders. As I say, I've literally just finished doing a video on this, which might be coming out tomorrow. Maybe Monday? I can't remember. At some point soon. A naked dead soldier is found, and we are told, quote, Sir Aenys put it forth that the man had drunk too much and gotten lost in the storm, though no one could explain why he had taken off his clothes to go outside. In real cases of death by hypothermia, a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing sometimes occurs, where the afflicted brain mistakenly believes the body to be too warm, so the hypothermia sufferer undresses. And of course, alcohol, which dilates blood vessels, makes people more susceptible to hypothermia. So how is it possible that no one in Winterfell, which implicitly includes a maester, could explain why this man was naked at the time of his death? Given how common death by hypothermia must be in northern winters, I find it hard to believe that this phenomenon is unknown in Westeros. Aenys Frey, sure, but there's plenty of Northmen in the castle who should be able to fill him in. Is the answer just that George doesn't know about it and accidentally described a real thing that happens? This doesn't feel like a good answer to me. So I think there's a better answer, which is that he was murdered. And I think this particular murder we're sort of hunting for the murderer in Winterfell. This particular murder was almost certainly done, I think, by Mance Rayder's spearwives, probably Holly. Why do I think that? Because that night, Holly comes to Theon very seductively, literally twirling her hair and sort of saying, "Hey, why don't you and me head off somewhere? I'd quite like to go to the crypts of Winterfell. Do you know where they are? Oh, it's really sexy down there. All those dead kings looking at you." And I'm not exaggerating. That's almost word for word what she was saying. And Theon just is like, well, that's not happening. And also, I don't know what's going on here, but I don't want to deal with it. And he just like makes his escape. The very next morning is when they find this body of I think it's the squire to Aimable-lina. And he's found in the lich yard, naked. Now, why do I think that's therefore Holly? Because she is coming on very strong to people in Winterfell who might know where the crypts are. Theon does know where the crypts are. Almost nobody else does, because the population of Winterfell at that time is not the normal population of Winterfell. The normal population of Winterfell have all been carted off down to the Dreadfort, and the people there now is House Bolton, House Frey, and the other northern lords who've been gathered there to pay fealty, effectively, to the Boltons. Why would Mance Rayder want to get access to the crypts of Winterfell? Well, that's an entirely different video, but he definitely does seem to want to. He and his spearwives are also trying to get access to fake Arya, because that's their ostensible mission when they're there by Melisandre, is to get her out and up to Castle Black, to Jon Snow, because Melisandre thinks that this is the only way they're going to get Jon Snow's trust, is by bringing him his sister. It starts to get a bit convoluted, but they want to find out where the entrance to the crypts of Winterfell is, which you might think, it's just there, it's a door. It has been snowing really hard at Winterfell, really hard, to the extent that the snowdrifts are outside the wall. They're 40 feet deep, which is like over 12 meters. So when Theon does eventually, he tells Barbary Dustin where the entrance is. It takes two men, I think, half an hour just to dig out all the snow to uncover the door. So basically, it's been snowed in, and nobody knows where this is. And visibility outside is so bad that Theon can't barely even see his hand stretched out before him. It's really bad. So it makes sense to me that she's been flirtatiously trying to get people to tell her where it is. If this drunk guy thinks to himself, well, I've got a chance here, and she's there going, could you show me where it is? Where would he start to look? He would probably start to look in the lich yard. It's the graveyard. Where else would the entrance to the crypts be? So he's gone there. He thinks, we can read between the lines on what he thinks is going to happen with him and Holly. But at some point, she will realize this guy doesn't actually know where they are. And that's when she can dispose of him, because she doesn't want anybody knowing that she's trying to find out where the entrance to the crypts is. So that is what I think has been going on there. In answer to your particular question, why is it that nobody thinks, oh, well, maybe this is what's going on, people have undressed because of that? I think there's two answers. First of all, I think the actual reason he's undressed is because he thought something was going to happen with Holly. But what you said quite rightly is that, so he's the squire of Aimable-lina. Aimable-lina is just like, he's a drunkard, that guy. He could just do it, and he doesn't know the North, so he would have no reason for knowing that sometimes these things happen. Almost all of the Northern Lords around him are pro-Stark, and they do not know exactly who's doing these murders. By this point, this is the second murder, I think, or second mysterious death at least. But they know things are happening, and so they would have no interest whatsoever in sort of suggesting anything. If Aenys Frey has already said, "Oh, he just got drunk and went outside," and people seem to accept it, fine, we'll just leave it be. So I think that's what's going on. I don't think there's a big mystery here. It's just that the Northern Lords don't wish to draw attention to suspicious deaths. Beazle Buzzle, good name. And saying, "Hi, Robert. Do all seasons fluctuate in length? Is it only summers and winters? I'd never heard of long springs or falls, only summers and winters." So it's mostly summers and winters is the answer, because they're the most obvious. The all seasons do fluctuate in length, but it's more like that spring and autumn are kind of like they're just the bridges between winter and summer. So you might get a long spring or a short spring, but it's the winter or the summer that can really stretch out to be very long. For my peoples, speaking of a dragon seed, was there a purge in King's Landing in Dragonstone post Robert's rebellion? We're not told. The fact is that there won't, as far as we know, have been any or many first generation or possibly even second generation dragon seeds left around. By which I mean, as talking of the Targaryens who were there, Viserys was too young. Dany wasn't born yet. Rhaegar wasn't the kind to frequent brothels, we're told, and everybody seems to sign up to that. His father, Aerys, certainly did play around a little bit in his younger days, but then after that, he'd lost lots of children, and he then seems to have stopped. But then, sort of going up, Jaehaerys seems not to have been particularly that way inclined, and then you get to the generation before that with Aegon V's children. So the number of dragon seeds, first and second generation dragon seeds, is likely to be limited depending on what happened with the Mad King. But yeah, I don't think we're told that happened, but it would make sense that any potential Aerys II bastards were dealt with in some way. Right, let's go to a question from actually, this one? No, it's not. I've got 3 or 4 more questions actually. Another one from Magma Frost. I have a question about Melisandre. I wasn't able to fully work my head around before last week's stream. Why does she offer to make a shadow baby with Davos? It can't be purely for their military application, because she has no shortage of loyal queensmen who'd no doubt be willing, and yet she doesn't seem to be making shadow babies with them. In her POV, when she thinks about making shadow babies at the wall, she doesn't think about any cost or limitations on her ability to do so. The creation of shadow babies is an intimate process, but I don't really get the impression that Melisandre would be at all prudish about that sort of thing. The only remaining explanation I can think of is that despite an abundance of Stannis-serving military applications for shadow babies and an abundance of people Mel could make them with, she only thinks it's worthwhile if Davos specifically is one to her side, or that she is bluffing, knowing that Davos would refuse, and she actually can't make a shadow baby with him or with the Queen's Men. So, why? And she does. She offers to Davos. She also thinks about Jon in this kind of context at the wall. So it doesn't seem to be specifically it has to be with Stannis, but there does seem to need to be man involved. So why? Well, when she's suggesting it to Davos, it's like Stannis is. I don't know if he's got it in him to make another one. The implication is this kind of drains his life essence in some way. So what she says to him is, with your life fire, we could. And then it kind of like Davos kind of stops her at that point and says, no, we're not doing this. So I think the implication, although she doesn't carry on with that sentence, and George R. R. Martin, as we know, doesn't like us to know all the details of how magic works. I think the implication is that Davos, that everybody's got in Melisandre's mind anyway, a kind of like a life force, life fire, as she would say it. And some people's is stronger than others. And Davos is very strong. He stays alive. He survived a couple of occasions when perhaps he could have died. So he has got a very strong life force. And so perhaps she thinks with that, the implication of the sentence is, we could make a really strong shadow baby. And particularly when she gets to the wall, she thinks shadow babies here would be incredibly strong. So yeah, I think that's what it is. She could. I think the implication is, yes, she could have shadow babies with any one of random people, but she offers it to Davos as this is a way you could serve your king, which is perhaps not that. The line would probably work on a lot of people, but on Davos it did not. Per Marcus Risman, 7 blessings, Robert, from a rainy Sweden. Well, hello to you in Sweden. It must be, if you're still watching, it's very late for you there. This is a follow-up regarding the R plus L equals J streams. I don't think this has been addressed, but apologies if I missed it. I'd like to hear your thoughts on whether the reveal about R plus L equals J would actually hold up even when it comes. In the show, everyone seems to accept it simply because a crippled boy said so when Sam found a scroll in the Citadel. But when I look at it, the evidence seems quite weak. Considering the political climate of Westeros, distrust of bastards, Jon breaking his vows as Lord Commander, etc., I find it hard to believe that people would simply accept it. What do you think? Is there a way the Lords of Westeros could be convinced? So I think there's 2 levels to this. Are we going to be provided with enough evidence for us as readers to believe it? And are people in Westeros going to be provided with the evidence? So I think the answer to the first half is yes. And that could be something akin to what happened on the TV show. If Bran does go back in time and we see this and he goes beyond the Weirwood network and he sees the baby there and Lyanna's doing the promise me thing, and if he sees that and he hears Ned going, well, I'll name him John then, and I'll raise him as my own, and it's like, so we will get the reveal. That bit I'm sure of. Your question, though, obviously is more about what about people in world. Now, some people in world, I suspect John will believe it, whatever happens, and I think that this is going to. Perhaps Bran will tell him. Perhaps Sam will say something. Almost certainly, we're going to get Howland Reed, who everybody knows was there, and everybody knows Ned trusted. So we'll get something from there. Maybe there'll be some other thing. We don't know. But I think John will believe it. Others, I mean, my general feeling is that he probably won't wish to push his claim much. And so who the others are who believe it doesn't really matter. I think that potentially we could see, say, Dany might come to believe it if he does reach out his hand and Rhaegal or whatever likes it, and it's like, oh, have you got some Targaryen blood in you? And it's like, oh, now you haven't to mention it. So that could be a way that she might believe. But then it's just a matter of, we often, I think, try and put our kind of like modern understanding. Is there enough proof here? in that world, I think you're very right. There's a lot of distrust, but it will also be who wants to make use of it, and whether they believe it actually matters less than whether they wish to use it in some way. So if they're told, actually, this person here is he's Rhaegar's son, so technically he's the rightful king, and then some people go, well, I don't want Cersei to be ruling. Don't quite like that Dany person. Who else is there? I'm not entirely sure. I think I want this person as my candidate. And then they might put him forward. So that, I think, is what we're looking at, is not people necessarily buying into it, but it's do people buy into it, or do influential people buy into it enough to want to use it? The same thing is there with Fagon, incidentally. Do the people need to have a piece of paper or some magic person saying, I've seen this, he is the... No, what they need is somebody there who believes it, who says, look at this guy, he looks like a Valyrian, he's holding up black fire, he's sitting on the Iron Throne, he's a Targaryen, and everyone goes, yeah. So that's the feel we've got going on here. If people want to get behind Jon, then that will matter. If not, it won't. I don't think Jon's going to push it himself. Bear Island saying, something I missed in my reading of the books was the subject of the fake Tommen theory. Tommen was sent to Rosby, intercepted by Tyrion, and eventually sent back to King's Landing. But the Tommen who returns looks different to most characters, with only the notoriously neglectful Cersei seeming not to notice. Whether House of Rosby is holding back the real Tommen or not, how do you think the idea might affect the succession chaos ahead for the Iron Throne? Well, I have to admit, I missed this as a theory as well, reading... I've only sort of stumbled across this in passing on a sort of message boards kind of thing. I will admit I don't, in the absence, I've not dug into it in huge amounts of detail, I will confess. But in the absence of any other information, yes, he might look a bit different. He's young and has aged up a little bit. But Cersei doesn't. And you say she's well known to be neglectful, but also she's obsessed with her kids, and her not noticing there's a difference seems unlikely. Her son, this isn't my son. Tyrion not noticing, or Jaime, or any of the other people who know Tommen, actually thinking, hang on a minute, this actually isn't Tommen. So yes, he might look a little bit different, but I don't think that that's going to play into anything myself. Eduardo Stealth saying, hi, Robert and Dan. What do you think of the tinfoil theory that George R. Martin has already finished all the books? He doesn't want to deal with the inevitable online criticism and backlash, so he has arranged to release everything after he dies. I mean, I think it is tinfoil, personally. I don't... he's denied it. And everything I've seen suggests that that's not the case. I mean, I've said before, I don't claim to personally know George R. R. Martin or personally know anyone in his inner circle, but I know people who are in his inner circle. So I think he would have to be doing such an amazing job to be even fooling his assistants and the people who are around him that he's writing The Winds of Winter. No, he's still at it. It's slow, it's frustrating, but and he's most of the way through. Who knows? We've not had an update for a little while from him, but the last proper one, he was 75% of the way through. He has been writing some more since then, so I don't know, 80%, whatever. He's a goodly way through it. And I don't think he's written both books. I don't think he's written one. What I do think that he might secretly be doing is writing some other things alongside, like Fire and Blood Part 2. He's admitted he's written a few pages of Fire and Blood Part 2. He seems to find that a whole lot easier to write. And also Duncan Egg stories. We know that he half wrote and abandoned one story. He's got an idea fully mapped out for another story, and he desperately doesn't want the Duncan Egg stories on TV to be overtaking the books. So, yeah, it's possible he's been doing some other stuff. Lady Vaughan-Strauss, greetings. I hope you're well. I am, thank you. How vast is the Weirwood network, and are there people technically outside of it who still have methods of communicating with it? If so, who might they be? And would Melisandre be fearful of just any Green Seer, or is it most likely that she's in fear of Bloodraven himself? So in terms of other people outside of it who still have methods of communicating with it, now I find this is an interesting one, because I think if you'd asked me a year ago, I'd have said, no, you can only access it. It's a standalone thing. You can only access this through the Weirwoods themselves, and you have to be a Green Seer, etc., etc. But two things. The first is what happened on House of the Dragon, where you had Daemon putting his hand on the Weirwood tree, seeing the visions, and then we suddenly get Helena appearing there and seeing him, and she is, as far as we're aware, just like a dragon dreamer, but she seemed to be able to see into the Weirwood thing. I thought that was... No, people weren't really talking about it. I thought that was like a massive shift in terms of our understanding of how magic works. But Helena, obviously, she may be a dragon dreamer in George's creation, but she isn't presented as such. And as far as we're aware, he wasn't involved in that creative decision. So we don't know. But there's also the bit which I talked about a little bit earlier, actually, when Melisandre looks in the flames and she sees Bloodraven, and she thinks he sees me, which seems to imply that he, using his Weirwood powers, can see her through her using her flames powers, which implies, I think, that there's more of a blurry line between these types of magic than I certainly once thought. So in answer to your question, are there people technically outside of it who still have methods of communicating with it? Potentially. I mean, Melisandre, if she could see Bloodraven and she knew that Bloodraven could see her, does that mean she could communicate with him like that? We don't know is the short answer, but possibly. Yeah, I think that's the question you were wanting me to answer. Lorelei Dragon saying, good evening, Robert. We're hoping we are enjoying the start of autumnal weather here. I hope you are as well. Yes, it's been very nice on my dog walks recently. George R. Martin seems to enjoy subverting expectations. There are many times in the stories where things are actually the opposite of what everybody knows them to be. For example, dragons and giants and children of the forest being said to be extinct when the reader sees that they still exist, or Ned being known as honest and honourable to a fault when he actually will betray anything to protect his family if necessary. I'm curious about your thinking on the ways George R. Martin sets and subverts expectations, both for the reader and for the characters. Is there something everybody knows that you would like to see revealed as false in coming books? Yeah, I mean, interesting questions. So subverting expectations, I think the biggest thing here, I don't know whether this counts as subverting expectations, but book one, I've said it before, he writes it as low fantasy, as if there is almost no magic there, with the exception of the prologue, the last little bit of the last chapter, and Bran's chapter of visions. You get a few odds and ends, like hints with Dany here and there, but broadly speaking, there's no magic going on. And the characters we're taught to believe are wise, Maester Luwin, Tyrion, they mock the idea that magic might exist. So that's the first thing that happens, is that we're presented with this broadly magic-free world, and then over time the magic is ramping up and up and up. As for subverting expectations, is there something everybody knows that you would like to see revealed as false in the coming books? I don't know whether this counts in terms of what you're talking about, but I want people to know what Jaime did. I just he's there presented to the world. The entire world sees him as Kingslayer, Oathbreaker, and I would just like the world to know that what he did was save 500,000 people, and all this time they've been hurling abuse at him for doing that, because they don't know that. They say you broke your vows. Actually, he's the person who is saving everybody's life, and that is probably a more important thing than sticking to his particular vows at that particular moment in time. So that is something I would love to be sort of like in world for a known thing to be flipped in some way. There's obviously the Jon Snow thing. It's not so much for me. It's not so much, again, a lot of this is character stuff, but it's not so much himself discovering the truth about his parents. That will be quite a big moment, obviously, in the books. But also, I think him understanding what Ned did for him, because Ned, he will discover, is not his father, but when he suddenly discovers all the lengths that Ned went to be protecting him all that time, that I think will be quite a big moment. Catherine Furseth, to what extent do you think Maester Aemon had dragon dreams? It didn't seem to bother him in his youth, even if he did have them. And he doesn't seem to say directly at any point that he does have them, apart from my brothers had them and they killed them all. Nor did he talk about dreams that bothered him. But on his last journey with Sam, he seems to dream a lot. What do you think, both with regards to Aemon and other Targaryens? It seems unlikely that dragon dreams should appear only at one stage in their lives. Well, we don't know whether dragon dreams might only appear at one stage in their lives. It's entirely possible that Maester Aemon's dragon dreams came to him in old age because the dragons were back, and that was what was prompting his dragon dreams. You're right, we don't hear of, in his youth, him having dragon dreams. We haven't really met him in his youth yet. We know he's around. We know that Egg went to see him. And we also know there's a big moment when he could have become king. And he decided not to. And there's also a moment when he decides to go up to the wall. Those things, many people have speculated that perhaps the reason why he did those things is because of some sort of dragon dreams, because he sees a need for him to be at the wall, for he saw that it shouldn't be him being king, those kinds of things. So it fits if he did have dragon dreams when he was younger, but we just don't know because we've not seen it yet. It's almost like when he's at the wall, he's so old that he can't explain everything that's happened to him in the past, particularly to people who don't know him and his past. His part of the reason he's up there still was because he was not being a threatening Targaryen. The moment, if Robert Baratheon thought Aemon Targaryen, yes, he's very old, but he's having these prophetic dreams about dragons and things, that might be the kind of thing that might prompt him to go, well, we'll just get rid of him as well. Keeping quiet actually probably helped him. Right, let's go to Sir Steve the O, saying, you mentioned that your main channel is for those who love nerdy detail. Absolutely. So here goes. This one is deep in the weeds. In your excellent post on Aragorn's tax policy, there was some nerdy detail regarding the relation to taxes and having a state army versus the fact that raising armies in Gondor would be delegated to fiefdoms. Um, if A Song of Ice and Fire Westerosi society is similarly feudal, people at the bottom are bound to their landowner, lord, liege, etc. So when the banners are called, it trickles down through the land and men will march off to war. Lannister army is a good example. That armor must be immensely expensive, no matter how deep the mines are at Casterly. So my question is: Game of Thrones and similar TV shows unrealistic in showing massive medieval armies blinged out? Wouldn't the poorest peasants have at most the armor or weapons they can afford? So I think so. Yes, you would have to go to a historian. There may be historians in the chat. Who knows? So feel free to tell me about real life in terms of what's going on in the stories here. Yes. So I think a lot of it though depends on who. When we say the banners are called, um, what do they send? They're not sending every single possible person they could send. And indeed, you often get, when you're getting the banners being called, you get that, well, they didn't send many from there, or what's going on over here. They didn't send their best people, all of that kind of business. When you get the Winter Wolves, it's like, and are they sending their old men down? What's going on? So it's that there is a choice to a certain degree about who joins up. Now, the working theory, I guess, is that they would, each major house will have not a standing army per se, but they will have several knights attached to it. They will have people who have been trained, men at arms and the like. They would keep their whatever they need to be able to protect their own castle, and then they'll be sending off some of their best. They might also, as you say, sort of go down the ranks and say, okay, well, we've got a smaller house who owes its allegiance to me. We'll get some of them, and we'll say to them, you need to send us 3 trained warriors, and these people over here, you need to send us 5 trained warriors. So that is the theory of how this works. In practice, everybody having exactly matching armor, no. And I don't think that's the way it's presented in the books. On the TV show, yes, because it looks cool and everybody understands who's on everybody else's side. In reality, the banners, George R. Martin puts a lot of emphasis on sigils. And we often wonder why he puts this much emphasis on sigils. It's because this is how you could tell people apart, particularly in battle and on fields like that. And you often get in Game of Thrones, I'll talk about Lord of the Rings in just a moment, but in A Song of Ice and Fire, you get, so Tyrion is there when the Dornish are coming up to King's Landing. He's there with like Podger, so who will tell me about all of these sigils that are coming here. So they want to know who is it who's coming. Often they would have like when they're with their banner, they would have the top sigil, the top flag is for who the overall boss person is. Here's the Stark sigil, and underneath that they'll have and here's the House Mormont bear, because we're House Mormont people, but we're fighting for Team Stark. So that is the way that it often would go, and the exact relationship to between the different levels of lords would dictate on what armor you might get. So if you're just there, if you get called up from like 2 or 3 tiers down, you've not got much armor, then you go up to your liege lord and they go, oh, in that case, you have this. But then when they head up, maybe the Starks or the Stark equivalent, they can also hand out, well, we've got a stockpile here of castle-made swords and things, so we can upgrade some of those. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not like you would get everybody in the Westlands turns up to Casterly Rock and then they go, right, we have got 50,000 suits of armor. There you go. Everybody wears the same thing. They will turn up in slightly different things. The Lord of the Rings example that you were talking about to start with, this is in Gondor, and the structure that we seem to have there does seem a bit similar than what we have, say, in the north in Westeros, is that Aragorn did not have a standing army, or at least he had a small standing army in Minas Tirith. And if he went out on a campaign, then he would call up from the fiefs. So from Dol Amroth and wherever else, he would say, come, send us some people. In fact, when you get in the main story of The Lord of the Rings, you get Minas Tirith is about to be attacked, and Denethor calls out to the fiefs, say, send me troops to help defend Minas Tirith. And it's a really good bit of writing. So much a lot of things. Obviously, it's a good bit of writing. A really good bit of writing when Pippin's there and he's sort of counting them in, of who's coming in from where, and you sort of sense around. He doesn't really know how many there should be from each of these different places, but you can kind of sense the people around him in Minas Tirith are like, is that all they're sending? Is that what we got? And to be fair to the Southern Fiefs, they were being attacked at the time, so they couldn't spare lots of people. But for the people in Minas Tirith who know that Sauron's massive army is about to attack them, it was a little bit dispiriting. So let's have a quick flick through the chat, just in case there are some experts here on armor. Cast Ballerina saying no need for generic sizes, just buy smalls and keep a breastplate stretcher around. Yeah, breastplate stretcher is exactly right. Agreed. Weirwood saying surcoats and badges for their size to distinguish. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I think the yeah, I think we've got an idea about what's going on there. So I think my Martin S. I don't know if you're still there watching this live. You sent me I'm afraid it was literally just before I was logging off from Patreon. You sent me a very good, interesting, and nuanced question that I'm afraid I didn't have chance to think my way through. I will try my very best to reply to that on Patreon, if that's okay. Which means my last question from one of my patrons. So now is a good time, if you have got another question in the chat, to drop it in there. Saying, Scott Bittner, saying, hello, Robert. I hope all is well with you. At the start of A Game of Thrones, it seems the Kingsguard is in a fairly sorry state. And by the end of A Dance with Dragons, they are right out terrible. Outright terrible. My question is, how able do you feel Aerys Oakheart is? Is he a good Kingsguard? Is he a true knight, or at least pretty close to it? I'd love to hear your thoughts on the so-called soiled knight. And then you said, P.S. I've never read anything in the Lord of the Rings series, but today I finished The Hobbit. I found it to be a delightful little story. It is a delightful little story, and that makes my heart very warm. I'm glad you enjoyed it. The Lord of the Rings, if you choose to go on there, is, yes, it's a sequel. It is. It's not in the exact same style. It has to be said that The Hobbit is very much a children's book. The Lord of the Rings, although it starts off a little bit along those lines once you're in the Shire, but soon when you're moving out of the Shire, then it does become darker is probably the wrong way of saying it. We all know the story of the Lord of the Rings, but Tolkien himself was very concerned. You can read in his letters before it got published, is that people are expecting a children's story, a sequel to The Hobbit. And this isn't like that. He thought it was very I can't remember the exact words he used, but adult is probably the only way of saying it. That was his view, and he was concerned that people would come into it with the wrong idea. Anyway, Aerys Oakheart. So he's a member of the Kingsguard. He's the one who goes with Myrcella, protecting Myrcella down to Dorne. While he's in Dorne, he gets seduced, really, by Arianne. She gets him into part of her plot to try and place Myrcella onto the throne. And during that plot, he gets killed, basically, by Darkstar. So, what do we think of him? Is he a true knight? No. Is he a good member of the Kingsguard? Again, probably no. But I think there's a nuance to this. is that he wants to be a good knight. There are some members of the Kingsguard who don't. Most of them, in fact, at this point, they don't particularly want to be a good knight. They're there to be in the Kingsguard. A lot of them are there placed by Cersei, effectively. Eris Oakheart seems to want to be a good knight. However, he kind of falls short in many different ways. The obvious one in terms of his character, members of the Kingsguard should remain celibate. He doesn't, because Arianne seduces him. He when Joffrey is there being cruel to Sansa, and he instructs his Kingsguard to be hitting her, then it's notable that she thinks that he holds some back. The other Kingsguard don't. The Hound doesn't hit her. Boris Blount and the like, Meryn Trant, they hit her hard. He's somewhere in the middle. So he's not a true knight, because a true knight wouldn't hit a girl like that, a defenseless young woman. But he's wanting to be better than he is. So we can't have huge amounts of sympathy for him over that. But then also, when it comes to combat as a knight, so a member of the Kingsguard you'd hope would be a really good fighter, he basically gets one hit killed, which and he does it by sort of like charging into battle. This actually bothers Arianne afterwards. It's like, what was he hoping to achieve? Just like charging off into battle like that. And it seems to be Eris was just like, he just thinks, I've fallen so far short. I'm going to go out in a blaze of glory, effectively, which he sort of fails at as well. So, is he a good member of the Kingsguard? No, he falls short. He wants to be, but not enough to actually make a difference. So that's my overall take on him. He's quite a tragic character. Martin S. saying, I am here and look forward to your answer on Patreon. Well, thank you very much. Right, I think with that, oh goodness me, we've been going nearly 4 hours. So that's a long one. BKC 2024 asking if I think the abandoned 5-year gap is one of the reasons George is having problems finishing, because the last 2 books would have to last 7 years for Bran to reach the age of majority. I mean, perhaps slightly, but I don't think the plan is to stretch out the time of the books to cover that 5 years. So some of the characters will be younger, which means, and I did do a video on this one a while ago, but which means that probably some of the plot lines that they were going to have might be changed somewhat, given to other characters, that kind of thing. No, I mean, if I had to pick one overarching reason, it's his decision to expand the story. The problems he has is when you get lots of overlapping POVs and things like that, and he has to try and work his way through what order things happen in, and what happens if this character meets that character first and then that character there. That's the kind of thing that seems to slow him down. And what he did at the beginning of particularly Feast for Crows and then A Dance with Dragons is he just added in massive amounts of new story. Here's a whole plot line with the Ironborn. Here's a whole Dornish plot line. Here's let's have Brienne as a POV character and have her doing things. Ooh, why don't we introduce Fagon? We've got an entirely new bit of story over there. So that, I think, is the moment where this got massive and very hard for him to sort of manage. Anyway, that. I haven't mentioned In Deep Sleep. I think I probably did right at the very beginning. If you like these live streams, and I'm aware of you, if you're watching them live, then I don't have adverts during them, but the adverts may well appear if you watch this back a little bit later. If you do not want the adverts, or if you use them to get to sleep, I'm very happy if you want to. That's fantastic. Don't feel bad about it. Um, if you go to In Deep Sleep, there's a link somewhere. Then these live streams, I'm putting them over there with a kind of soothing background. Instead of my face, you'll have like nice, relaxing something there, bit of sound of a crackling log fire or whistling wind or something along those lines, aims to help you get to sleep. So it'll be the live stream and then just either silence or the sound of the wind going or something like that, to take you through the night. So, and there, no adverts in the middle at all. So I think that's probably it. There are videos coming on the main channel, obviously, and the shorts will continue coming on this channel. Don't forget to check out Spotify. If you find it easier to look at my main videos over on Spotify, go and have a look for me there. I think that's all I have to say. I will be back next week with something I haven't decided yet, but I'm sure I will let you know over on Patreon in good time. But that is all for now. Take care, everyone. And if you're watching later, this will be where the playlist to other live streams is. This will be linked to Patreon. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you soon.